Well, hello, folks. This is Katie with Vintage and Vinyl, back with another great video for you today. And I'm excited to be telling my tale of Coca-Cola repros and fantasy items. I'm excited for you all to tune in tonight. Now, I'm joined by the rest of the Triptych. So we've got Nate and Patrick here with us, and of course, an honorary Triptych member, Louie, who's probably going to bark a little bit throughout this segment. But welcome to you, Nate and Patrick. How are you guys doing tonight?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you. Great.
Thanks for hosting.
Fantastic. So tonight we are going to talk all about Coca-Cola reproductions and fantasy items. And I hope that this will be a really interesting video for collectors, new collectors, and people that are reselling, because this will hopefully help you understand what Coke made, the sheer volume of it, the master marketing behind it all, and the items that are fantasy that were never made by Coke, and reproduction items that Coke made that often gets confused with older items. So hopefully this will give you a little insight into the collector's world of Coca-Cola and what the true things are and what the not so true things are. So who do we have joining us in the chat, folks, tonight?
Oh, right out of the gate, we had Peterson joining us, and Elderly Poodle also signed on early. And Deb Sherman saying her hellos, Carrie, KCATX, and we got Kelly Blanchard coming in.
Oh,
that's Cheryl Ross. Cheryl Ross is here. Hi, Cheryl. There's Susical. LaDonna Durvin is here as well. Amy B, and Melinda Lavish Mango has joined us, and Tim as well has just come on from Canada. Hi, Tearthane. And Tammy Renee Walker and Tiger is here as well.
Oh, that is wonderful. Welcome, guys. I'm so glad that you are here tonight. I think this will be a fantastic triptych. Hopefully, Louie settles down a little bit, but she says hello to all of you guys.
Hi, Louie.
Hey, Louie.
She's very excited about Coca-Cola things. She's definitely a Coca-Cola dog. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started on the triptych. I'm going to start with a little bit of fascinating Coca-Cola history. Coca-Cola is one of those amazing companies that has a very long run, big following. They made some great, obviously, soda, and they were just master marketers, and they have a really fantastic history. So I'm going to start off by telling you just a little bit about Coke. Now, Coke was actually invented by Dr. John Pemberton, and he got a degree in pharmacy at the Southern Botanical Medical College in Georgia. And in 1855, John and his family moved to Columbus, Georgia, and he became a successful and very popular druggist. He did medical exam, performed some minor surgeries, and handled the pharmacy. He was also very successful with his own lines of proprietary medicines. He did quite a few of those. And in fact, if you can find any early bottles with John Pemberton on it, or John S. Pemberton, they are quite collectible. Now, he did work in the Civil War, and in 1869, he ended up moving to Atlanta, Georgia, to rebuild his business. There was a fire, and of course, he had quite a little injury after the war, so he really needed to get the business back up and running. So he started developing a French cola wine. But at the time, wine was really becoming something that wasn't put into medicine. It was going out of style. So we started working on another product that would aid digestion, extend life, prevent headaches, fatigue, and all of that would be derived from the famous coca leaf. And yes, early Coca-Cola did in fact have cocaine in it. Of course, now that's not the case, but back then people didn't know any different. And thus, Coca-Cola was born and sold at Jacob's Pharmacy at their soda fountain in Atlanta, Georgia, the famous soda fountain. And carbonation was then added, and it really took off, and they named it the so-called temperance drink. Now, shortly after, Pemberton formed the Pemberton Chemical Company, and there were several guys that came into town. They were actually looking to sell another product, and they found Dr. John, and they decided to form with him and create the Pemberton Chemical Company. So Frank Robinson, David Doe, Ed Holland, and John Pemberton started the chemical company. And in 1887, Dr. Pemberton applied for a patent, and it was actually approved. So they approved the Coca-Cola patent. And of course, in 1895, Coca-Cola was sold in every state and territory. So the Pemberton Chemical Company had some early stock forms, which are highly collectible. And Coca-Cola was born, which is just fantastic. Now, in 1890, Coca-Cola officially started using its famous slogan, delicious and refreshing, and they moved away from the fact that it was used as a medicine and more of a drink. So early Coca-Cola items are very rare. In fact, most of them don't exist, but you will see images like this that talk about it relieving exhaustion or fatigue or headaches or tiredness or nausea. But new Coca-Cola, after about 1890, they started really marketing it more as a soda, and it just caught on. It became so popular, and everyone has been drinking Coke since then. So as you say, the rest is history, and Coke is just still so popular, so collectible, and of course a soft drink that's chosen by many across America. Love Coca-Cola's history. And of course, if you visit Atlanta, you can go visit the Coca-Cola Museum, learn all about Dr. John Pemberton, and you can actually see Jacob's Pharmacy. They still have Jacob's Pharmacy there, and it's a very fascinating tour. So with the amount of Coca-Cola history and the widespread eras that Coca-Cola produced advertising, there are definitely lots of reproductions and fantasy items that came out of that time period. And so I want to show you a video here, just a little video of really the sheer volume of items that they use to market their product. The thing that amazes me about Coca-Cola is that they were really master marketers. They just used every opportunity they had to market their product. So if they could put their logo on something, by golly, Coke did it. And they gave away all kinds of things, put their logo on all varieties of different marketing products to actually sell their products in stores. It's really amazing. So we're going to take a look here at a book I have, which is really considered the Coca-Cola Bible. It's Petretti's Guide. Now, Alan Petretti is a Coca-Cola collector himself. He's known to have one of the most amazing collections. He's got lots of money, and he's just built this insane collection of rare Coca-Cola items. And so he wrote this book. And this just shows you a little bit of how much Coca-Cola actually produced as far as advertising goes. I mean, they just made so much stuff. It's unbelievable. And I hope this video is going to play here. Can you guys see that on your end, or is it freezing?
It's frozen at the moment.
Okay.
Try again.
Let's see if I can get this to play. Hopefully it will. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Okay. My internet, I'm assuming, just took a little bit of a turn, a weird turn. Let's see. Okay. Well, folks, this video may not work, but we'll talk a little bit about the things Coca-Cola produced. They produced everything from items that went to children in school. So they made school packets with their logo on it, rulers, pencils, pens. They made street markers that had their logo on it to help kids safely cross the street. They even produced their logo on wallets, keychains, pins, plates. They made all kinds of advertising pieces that were given away. The stuff that they did at stores is what's really amazing to me. So they would produce all kinds of signs. The amount of signs Coca-Cola made for advertising their product is incredible. They even had mini store displays, bottle carriers, racks. I mean, it is absolutely mind-boggling, the stuff that Coca-Cola produced. And of course,
So, Katie, were they actually producing these themselves, or were they being produced by the makers that they were backing? Were they making these pencils and pencil cases in their own factories, or was it a place that made this that they were licensing their own brand name to put on it?
No, they would have different companies put their name on it. There were many companies that they hired to do art for them, that they hired to make certain products. Steel companies would make things with their logos on it. So no, yeah, they didn't produce this stuff themselves in their own factories, but they used it. And they really did a good job at training their salesmen to market their product and get it out there. There are tons of really cool advertisement pieces you can pick up from the 40s and 50s, highlighting salesmen, tips and tricks and reels and booklets. That's a whole area of collecting that's fascinating to me, because you can see how Coca-Cola really taught their people to market their product, and it's just amazing. So when you get into the world of Coke, you can almost be overwhelmed by the amount of stuff. But what's cool about that is there really is something for everyone. So you can collect really, really expensive porcelain advertising signs from the 30s, or if you don't have that kind of budget, you can always start collecting bottles, which are very inexpensive. So there's really something for everyone in the Coca-Cola world, which I just think is marvelous. So unfortunately, that video just doesn't want to work, but we will move on with the rest of the triptych, and I will post that over on my IG.
The bottles might make a good triptych at some point as well, because I know the different shapes of bottles and what was the shape of their bottle? Hobble skirt or something like that?
Yeah, they had a hobble skirt bottle, and then of course it became the contour bottle. They also made the first early bottles are Hutchinson bottles. They had straight-sided bottles with a paper label. I mean, the amount of bottles they made too is amazing. That's a whole area of collecting as well. You know, that's kind of the neat thing about Coke, is you can just decide, I'm going to collect trays and only collect trays and become really knowledgeable in that area. Or I'm only going to collect double-sided porcelain signs, or I'm collecting only tacker signs. There's a guy I met that only collects Coca-Cola pencils and pens, which is like 3 pages worth of items that they produced.
Wow.
It's just really cool to me. But of course, with that, there are lots of reproductions, and that is something that you have to be very careful of. When I shop for Coca-Cola myself, I always look at an item and I have to be leery of it from the get-go. That's the only way for me to really decide if it's a true original or if it's something that's been reproduced. Now, there is nothing wrong, folks, with collecting reproductions. In fact, that can be a really inexpensive way to get into the Coke hobby. But just know that those reproductions are not going to hold the value as things that are original. So true antique collectors of Coca-Cola, like myself, we're not particularly interested in the reproductions. We want the thrill of finding something that's from the 20s or from the 30s. But if you like those images and you want to decorate with them, certainly by all means, reproductions are a great way to go. But as far as a collector's market, they're really not going to hold their value. And in my opinion, unless you can buy something for a penny, they're really not worth picking up to resell, because they're just not going to hold the value that something that's from the actual 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s would. So I always kind of pick up Coke things, and I'm always skeptical of them from the get-go until I can prove that it is a legitimate item. So that's kind of the best way to be thinking when you're out shopping for things, is to say, okay, I don't believe that this is real until I can prove that it is. And then that will really help you if you're getting into the world of Coca-Cola collecting. And I would recommend, as a collector, is I would start with one area. Say, I want to collect this, and then learn about it. And then as you start to see other Coke things, you'll kind of learn about those too. And then you'll just be knowledgeable as a whole. So
now, we actually had a question come in from TFA. So Tim is asking, and you might touch on this in the going forward, so if you want to wait, but because you are talking about the companies that are making these reproductions, do they end up, are they required by law to pay any sort of licensing fee to Coca-Cola if it's a legit reproduction, like separating maybe the fakes from the reproductions?
That's a great question, Tim. Coca-Cola actually made a lot of reproductions themselves. So most of what I will be showing are made actually by the Coca-Cola company, and they're still making lots of them today. If you visit the Atlanta store after you visit the museum and you take your tour, you can go into the shop and purchase all kinds of wonderful things from the actual museum, and they all have older images that are now put onto a modern piece. So a lot of the inspirations for these old reproductions are taken from really, really old calendar images, and you'll find that a lot in Coca-Cola pieces. Now, there are companies that work with Coke to produce something. So they might have a collaboration project like you would in the designer world, where you'll see like Disney pairing with Gucci or something. There are those types of situations as well in the modern day that you'll find. And I'm sure that they do pay some sort of fee, but I don't know exactly the details of that. But most of what I'll be showing today are things that were actually made by Coke when it comes to reproductions. Now, fantasy items, that's a whole other thing, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. But when you're talking Coke, yes, most of these were actually made by Coke. And we're going to start today with the calendar. Now, like I mentioned, a lot of the reproduction pieces use images from early calendars and advertising pieces. Early pieces are becoming harder and harder to find, and they can command a pretty high price tag. So in the 70s, Coca-Cola did a lot of reproduction, sort of as an anniversary thing. And in 1974, they made a whole series of reproduction calendars. So this is the 1974 calendar that they did. And if you look at this piece here, this is interesting because this ended, and you can see it had a starting bid of 200, but this is not actually an antique 1927 Coca-Cola calendar. So I find this to be kind of an odd marriage. So what this person has listed here, and I'm not saying it is the fault of the person that listed this, most likely they probably didn't know that this was something that wasn't actually a real 1927 piece. Now, there are parts that are real, so this is an odd marriage. So the bottom is a legit 1927 calendar bottom, but the top is actually a 1974 calendar, as we just previously saw. And so what happens with a lot of these calendars is people will cut off the 1974 piece, and they will attach something from 1927 to the bottom to make it look old, or they will frame these and cut off the 1974 bottom. And then people that pick up stuff like this, they don't know that it's not real because it seems real. I mean, if I were not as knowledgeable about Coke as I am now, if I saw this in a store as a new collector, I'd probably be like, oh my gosh, that's a legit calendar from 1927, but it isn't. And I'll show you why. So if you look at this girl here, see, she is facing a different direction, and also pay attention to the border. The border is extremely ornate. The original calendar of her, she is facing the other way and does not have that fancy border. So the original 1927 calendar of this particular girl, notice how she is facing. So she is facing to the left. This girl is facing to the right, and it has this ornate border. So when you see these ornate borders on these calendars, you can almost always guarantee that this is the 1974 reproduction, because all of the original calendars would not have had that ornate border. They all had a relatively simply designed border, kind of plain but elegant, but just not as ornate as this.
And a question for the fake, and maybe comparing it to the original, the piece at the bottom, you said that they attached in the fake one, they attached in 1927. It looked like they attached the entire stack of the calendar pages. So one, I don't know if there's one that closes in, zooms in closer. Can you tell how it was attached? Like, are they modern staples? And is the old one a full year's worth of the pages, or was each page different calendar page? Because the picture that you showed of the original made it look like the April 1927 was just integrated onto the sheet.
Yeah,
it would have been this particular calendar here has the April 1927 on the bottom, but they also have another version of this that has the staples. And some of the early calendars will have the staple at the bottom for April of 1927. Again, when I was doing preparations for the triptych, I had to take a lot of images out of my collector's book because you just don't find some of this early stuff around anymore. So it was kind of hard to trace down. But you'll see here that this calendar is this here, but they have cut off the bottom. And see, this is January, and they had multiple pages.
Right.
With the same, I think it was the same girl, because they did a whole series of these with different girls from the early 20s on it. So this one is not a true piece, and I don't think there were any bids, because I'm assuming collectors like myself spotted this a mile away and said, nope, That is not worth $200. Now, had this been a true, legit original from 1927 without this weird top, certainly would have commanded that price. I think that would have been absolutely fair, but
Now,
not for that.
Vinny has made a comment, and it makes me wonder. So he's saying that in some cases the prints, the reproductions are a lot more fuzzy.
Yep.
Now, but in the one that you showed, you said that Coca-Cola issued that image. It was redone with the border and everything, but it was their image. Wouldn't they still have had the original art, or were they taking impressions of the original art? Were they making copies of their own stuff?
They made copies of their own stuff, and when they redid it, sometimes they would change little things here and there to make it different. And so this is what they did. And they added that more ornate border. And like Vinny's pointing out, a lot of reproduction stuff that you're going to find, the images are fuzzy. The originals are always going to be really clear, really sharp, really well done. A lot of the reproduction stuff is just sort of mass produced, and it's cheap, and it's not very well made compared to the amazing lithography that they would have had back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So that is something to keep in mind, is the clarity of things as well. Now, this is a legitimate 1923 Coca-Cola calendar from 1923. You can see the staples there on the pad at the bottom. And this is something that I wanted to show because while I believe that this is a legitimate piece, you do have to be careful of calendars that are in frames, because people will frame some of those reproduction images, and it's kind of hard to tell if they've cut off the border or they've cut off the 1970s piece at the bottom and framed it, because you still can buy old 1920s calendar tops without the bottoms, and they still are worth some money. So just be cautious when you have these old frames. I've seen people take some of the calendar images and they will try to dupe the collector by putting them in an antique frame with old nails and everything, and they're not legit. But here, if you pay attention to the bottom, see this says made in USA, and this one also has copyright the Coca-Cola company. So a lot of legitimate pieces from the Coca-Cola company will have little marks like this that you want to pay attention to when you are looking at the reproductions versus the originals. And you'll see here this has some really old staples in it. Of course, those probably could be faked if someone tried hard enough. So just paying attention to those details, being really scrupulous when you are buying. And if something seems cheap, there might be a reason that it is cheap. So a lot of antique advertising from Coca-Cola is going to be usually pretty expensive when you get into especially the teens, the 20s, the 30s. If it's a rare piece, if it's advertising that's maybe ephemera based, so not many of them survive, those kinds of things command a pretty big price tag on the collector's market. So if you can get lucky like Vinny has and found things for a really good price because someone didn't know what they have. But for the most part, if it's inexpensive, there's a reason it is, and I would investigate that before spending money, unless you want to collect the reproductions. But notice that this is commanding an $899 price tag, and I think that is totally fair for something.
We've got a couple of questions here. Jenny has asked, is Coke, the company, well known for taking legal action against people who are reproducing their things?
You know, that's a good question. I'm sure they are. I just don't know. I've never seen any lawsuits come out into the public eye, but that's something I probably have missed too. But I'm sure they do. I mean, it is illegal to produce anything without the knowledge of the company. So if you're slapping a Coca-Cola item on it or a Coca-Cola image on something and trying to sell it, and Coca-Cola does not have their trademark on it and they did not produce it, that is illegal. Now, if you're going to do a crafting project or something for your house, that's a different thing. But just be aware that those kinds of reproductions and fakes are really something that's sad because Coca-Cola doesn't have their stamp on it. And I'm sure if they did find out, they could go after you.
And Jamie has actually asked, as a collector, do you ever contact those sellers who have got items that you know are incorrect? I'm sure you've told me at one stage you have talked to a seller about an item you thought wasn't legitimate.
Yes, actually, I have, Jamie. That's a great question. I have done this so many times with trays. I have seen, for one, the Tarzan tray before on eBay listed as an original. I've seen the golfer tray with the golfer gal and guy on it. That's from 1927, I believe. I've seen a reproduction of that from the 70s listed at $1,000. And I emailed the person and I was very polite, but I told them, this is not original and here's why. And I sent them photos from my book. So I had legitimate research. And the lady was not very nice to me. She was actually very insistent that she was right. And that's a shame because that's not true. She wasn't right. And I knew it. But I've had other people that when I've been in antique stores, I've taken things to the counter and just said, hey, I think you should know this seller's asking $90, but this is a reproduction tray from the 70s and it's worth about 12, and here's why. And usually the antique malls are very, very nice and very grateful that I've said something just so that their buyers don't get duped, And it's easy as a new collector to get kind of, I hate to use the word dupe again, but it's true. It's very easy when you're getting into this to be confused because a lot of those images seem old, but they're actually reproduced onto something from the 70s, 80s, or 90s.
Great.
Now, this is an interesting thing. This is a Coca-Cola coaster set that they produced, I believe, in the late 90s. Let's see if it's got the date on it here on the package. You'll find these, this one's from 1983. They produced these quite a bit, and a lot of times you'll find them outside of the package, and that is why that's very confusing to people. They did a set of 6 of them, and they're all different. They're featuring women and images from the calendars and the trays from the 1920s. This particular lady, the flapper girl, she was taken from a 1923 calendar and tray, and she was put onto this kind of cheap metal coaster. So a lot of these coasters that you're going to find have this weird kind of indent on the back. I'm not really sure why they did this, because when you put your drink on it, it wobbles. So it really is useless as a coaster, in my opinion. And it's cheap, kind of flimsy metal. The images you can see here, even through the plastic, are very fuzzy. So this is something that was reproduced quite a bit. So you'll run into these coasters. I've also seen them more oval shaped as well that Coca-Cola made. So just be aware of these. These are not worth a whole lot. I think $18 is even a little high, to be honest, for the set of 6 of these here. But again, if that's something that you want to add to your collection just to have, because the images are cool, absolutely go for it. But as a true collector like myself, not particularly interested in these pieces here. Now,
I will throw out a comment as the resident coaster expert.
Yes.
So those 4 ridges actually make the coaster more rigid. Without them, it would be very prone to bending. But the concept behind them is because they're raised on the front, your condensation is supposed to fall between them so that the coaster doesn't stick to your glass. It doesn't work, but that's the concept.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. I find that it rocks my glass back and forth. So it's a little weird. But thank you, Patrick, for weighing in. Definitely Patrick knows everything coasters.
Yep.
Not everything, but more than the average bird.
Now, this is a 1923 tray, and as you can see, that is the image that they used for this particular coaster here. So I wanted to showcase that. Now, this is something that gets reproduced a lot. And yes, Coca-Cola did actually make gum. This is something that's shocking to a lot of people, but Coca-Cola made gum for a very, very short time. And this is something that I find just absolutely fascinating. They made gum from 1903 to 1924, so not a big span of time, but very few of these gum pieces actually exist. They're extremely rare, and they can command big bucks. I've seen one gum wrapper alone sell for $5,000. So when you see something like this, and the price is $25, this is where, as a collector, I would go, okay, why is that $25? That's too cheap for this item. So really knowing the products that Coca-Cola produced and knowing that a lot of the early pieces, as I mentioned, are going to be reproduced because they're just something that you don't find anymore, and people want to have them in their collections. I've also seen Alan Portretti himself, the guy that wrote the book. He sold one of his Coca-Cola gum jars, and what he did is he copied from his original gum packs, he copied reproduction gum pieces and put them onto modern gum. So he copied the label, folded them. He must have made, I think, like 800 of them, and then put them into a jar so that you kind of have the look of the real gum without paying the price tag. The jar was original, but the gum wasn't. And he did list that properly with an eBay seller, Ray of Coke. I follow him on eBay. He's a very legitimate seller. Wonderful, knowledgeable guy on Coca-Cola, and he worked with him to create a special gum piece, and I think it sold for around $1,000. But just be leery of Coca-Cola gum things because they are reproduced quite a bit. And this is something that I don't think Coke actually made. So this you could almost consider a fantasy item, but it is out on the market.
I imagine the fact that there's 20 of them available would be a bit of a red flag as well.
Yes.
Yes, Nate. That's another thing. When you see something multiple available, that's a little bit of something that would raise concern to me because I'm like, why do you have this many original pieces of gum? So be aware of that. This is pictures of the original gum pieces, and you can see they did a very good job on the reproduction, but this paper is very, very thick. You can tell that they've made it a little bit thicker and they've antiqued it a little bit. It's not folded shut here, and the gum foil is very shiny, so you can just tell that this is a newer piece versus these, which would have some legitimate staining, age, and probably tears and be very, very thin paper. So there is the gum.
Cheryl's asking if you know if there was cocaine in the gum as well.
I don't know that, Cheryl, and that is something that has been debated about whether cocaine was actually in Coke. From all my research, I do 100% believe early Coke had cocaine in it. I do have a Coca-Cola medicine bottle because they did sell it as medicine for quite some time. That is listed as cocaine removed. So I find that interesting. Now, I don't know about the gum, but Coca-Cola did have a company that did gum and cigars as well. So they had a Coca-Cola like candy company. Didn't last very long, but it's a very interesting piece of Coca-Cola history.
Now, really quick before we move on, with the real one that you showed from your book, they were manufacturing it. It looked like they were manufacturing it from 1913 through 1920, but you said there wasn't a lot of it out there.
So, no, these actually didn't sell particularly well from my research. They just never caught on. And Coca-Cola just didn't do anything with them after about 1924. Now, there is some contrary research saying that maybe they gave it to Wrigley, and Wrigley did something secretly with Wrigley's name on it, but Coca-Cola was still producing it. I don't 100% know that that's true. I really think that it was just such a short run of this. Now, this is something that gets reproduced a lot. In fact, you can walk into Hobby Lobby right now and buy one of these, but they're not going to be legit. These are door push bars, and this just goes to show you the clever marketing techniques that Coca-Cola had. So these were put onto door pieces, and as you would walk into a grocery store or any type of shop that would sell Coke, the Coke was right on the door, and of course it's a door push, so you're pushing in to open the door, and it would visually remind you, hey, I'm going to pick up a pack of Coke. Very, very clever marketing. However, these are reproduced a lot. Now, they made these up until about 1939 to 1980. You can see this one's definitely an 80s push, but they've reproduced these quite a bit. These are very hard to come by. In good condition, and when you do find them, they'll command about a $200 to $300 price tag. Of course, condition with all of these things are always the key. So if you find things in pretty poor condition, you might get it for a cheaper price when you're talking originals. But this is something that's reproduced a lot, and you really want to know your shapes, because that will show you what's an original versus a reproduction. Also, paying attention to the lettering is key, because you might find a lot of similar words on the reproductions, like ice cold Coca-Cola in bottles, or take some home, or sold here, but it may not be the exact same wording on the original. So they may take kind of a combination of things. So this one here is one that I actually, the only reproduction in my house that I own, because I'm using it as a placeholder until I can get an original, is this piece here. Now this is sold at Hobby Lobby. This person has it listed for $25, which I think is about the going rate for these. And you can see that it's not a real piece. You can see that there's some kind of faked age to it. It is about the right size for one of these smaller pieces here. But if you notice, none of the smaller pieces in that size would have that wording. So you see it says ice cold Coca-Cola in bottles. If you go back to this photo here, ice cold Coca-Cola in bottles has a different shape. So you want to pay attention to that. That's really important. Also, weight. A lot of these reproductions are very flimsy. They're very thin. Originals are going to be very heavy. They're going to be well made, and you can just feel the differences in weight. Now, this one is actually made from tin, but a lot of these are made from aluminum, and this will help you too with the signs. I always carry around a little magnet, because if you try to put a magnet up to aluminum, it's not going to hold. But the original door pushes are made from tin, and the magnet will stick to them. Now, this is a rare case here because this actually is tin and the magnet will stick to it, but you can just tell that it's not an original piece. And if you look at the back, you'll also notice it's got a barcode. Pay attention to barcode stickers. Pay attention to weirdly uniformed coloring on the backs, because originals are going to have some legit wear from being on the doors. This one has sort of that uniform faked wear. So pay attention to that when you're shopping.
Now, is the reproduction also curved as if it were a door push?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just a sign?
No, they market these as door pushes. They're mimicking the door pushes from back in the day, but they are not actually the door pushes that were around back then. So they have the curve. They have the 4 little holes to be mounted, but they are not actual Coca-Cola pieces that were used in the day. Now,
and is your placeholder pushing open one of your doors, or do you just hang it on the wall?
I just hang it on the wall. I don't have it as a door push because I don't have the kind of door for that. But I just have it hanging on the wall, and that's what a lot of people do with them anyway. When they get originals, is they just hang them on the wall. Now, this is a piece I want to show because it's a door push that's obviously a reproduction. But one of the things you want to be cautious of with Coke is this 5-cent mark. Now, Coke did used to be sold at soda fountains for 5 cents, and that has been reproduced and reproduced on images for ages. People love this idea of 5-cent Coca-Cola. I don't know. It's maybe the novelty of the price, the fact that it brings back memories of going to the soda fountains from back in the day. But you will find a lot of reproductions with 5 cents on it. So if you see anything with 5 cents on it, it almost is better to say, I don't think that's real, than to believe it is until you can prove that it is. Because 5 cents is on a lot of reproductions. So pay attention to that. This is obviously not something that was ever produced for Coca-Cola back in the day. You see anything like that here? I do not. So that is something that you want to be aware of. Now, it's a cool piece in and of itself, but I don't believe that it's worth $50, to be quite honest. I think this is more at a $25 priced item. And I do appreciate sellers. I will give props to these sellers here that are listing it as old style retro antique soda fountain advertising sign. So they are listing it as old style retro. So that kind of gives you a little hint that it's not an original. Same with this person. They did not really list it as an original. They didn't say it was a reproduction, but it's not listed as like antique or rare. You'll find some of these, and it's just that people don't know and they're not educated, listing things as rare. And you got to be careful with that, because that I see a lot when I'm on eBay. Rare this, rare that. Well, it's probably rare for its time when it was made, but that's not a legitimate old piece, so therefore it's not rare. That's my little talk on rare. I feel very strongly about that word. Now, this is something else that Coca-Cola made. They made door handles and push plates. And so these are similar to the door pushes, but these are more of a plate that you would push. So sort of like when you go into a door and they've got a little plate that you push onto. I know Dillard's, if you go to their department store, they have their own push plates currently. You can go see that today. But Coca-Cola did their own version of these. And these are something that are reproduced a lot. Now, they're reproduced more as signs. So you will see people listing them as signs, but they were originally sold as push plates. And these are reproduced a lot. I also want to point out here, you'll see here that these are in different languages. Coca-Cola had an amazing, extensive market for different countries. So you will find a vast majority of things that were produced for the Canadian market, for the Mexican market, for France, for really all over the world. And I find that interesting when you're looking at things. Those things typically don't get reproduced a ton. I really see the American stuff getting reproduced a lot. So this is the push. Now you'll see here, this is a fishtail sign. This is what we call a fishtail. And this person has listed it as a Coca-Cola door push sign, 3x6 metal. And this tells you right here, it's $13. The originals would not be selling for that. And you can see that the back is just a uniform green color. It doesn't look that old. And it's a little bit newer. You can also look, if you go back to the original page here, again with the wording. If you look at the original one, there is no push on the Coca-Cola fishtail. It just says Coca-Cola Be Really Refreshed. So they've kind of combined two vintage things and made a reproduction style. So just be aware of those wordings. Same here with the pull. Now, if you notice, this one is pull, refresh yourself. And yes, they did make something like that. But notice the spacing at the top here. See how much space there is between the word pull and the top? If you go back to this one here, you'll see that that's really close to the top. And it's almost, the letters pull are almost going over the curve. So a lot of these reproductions, the spacing isn't done well. And you'll see this particularly with the trays where stuff is kind of cut off. It doesn't quite fit correctly in the pieces. They're just, I don't know, they're not right. And so this is something, of course, this person is also listed, I think it's the same seller, for $13. So that kind of gives you a red flag. If you're looking through eBay and you see this and you go, oh, that looks really similar to the one that they produced back in the day, then you see the $13 price tag and you're like, I don't think that could be a legitimate 1940s piece because that's too cheap. You know, this book was published in 1990, I believe. And in 1990, now the price guides really are kind of useless once they come out because I think the values fluctuate so much. But you can see here in 1990, this was valued at around $200 and probably more now because it's from 1940 through the 50s. And you probably just don't see a lot of these anymore. So I would say that that's probably still at about value for an original. So the $13 price tag should be buyer beware. This here is another Coca-Cola door push. Now, this is interesting because this is porcelain, and they did porcelain signs. They do porcelain reproductions. They also do tin reproductions, but the porcelain ones can be quite tricky for new collectors because they're heavy. And a lot of times you'll find that they fake age. So this one here, there is some manufactured rust, and it looks kind of legit because you would think, okay, this had screws at one point. They were on a door, probably outside. Rain must have gotten in. I could see that being old. Well, it's not. You can just tell if you look closely enough at it that it is reproduction rust. Also down here, and I wish it would let me zoom in, but I can't. See here, it says the Coca-Cola Company made in USA. The original ones were not marked with that mark at the bottom. And this one has the copyright symbol. So you can tell that this is a newer Coca-Cola piece. For a porcelain sign, even though that this is new, I would say $34. Not a starting bid, but like a set price would be very reasonable for something like this because it still is a porcelain sign and those cost money to produce. But it's not something I would want for my collection. So now we're going to talk a little bit about bottles. And these are things that get reproduced quite a bit. So you really got to know your bottle history a little bit. The Hutchison bottles, which are these bottles here, These were around from 1899 to 1902. Originals of these can command a massive price tag. We're talking a couple hundred for one bottle. So again, the price is really a good indicator sometimes of reproduction. Now, of course, Vinny will be in the chat and he'll say that he's found some really great things at a cheap price. And you can buy people that just don't know what they have. But knowing about these things really does help you find those people to get a good deal. But for the most part, if you see these, they're not going to be cheap. So if you find a cheap one, there's a reason it's cheap, because it's probably a reproduction. These bottles are very desirable too. These next bottles, they were made from 1900 to 1916. These are what I would consider the straight-sided bottles with the diamond paper label. These are very sought after by collectors. In fact, I wish I had one, but I don't. They're very hard to find in good condition because, of course, that paper label would rip off. They had a brown version and a taller kind of soda bottle green color. And these are wonderful. They're just very hard to find, but they made a lot of reproductions of these. They also have these bottles. Now, these bottles were made from 1916. These are sort of the contour bottles that we're used to today. They had a version called the hobble skirt, but the hobble skirt bottle was too bulbous, and so they changed it. There's only two actually of the hobble skirt bottles, I believe, in existence that they produced as kind of a test piece, and one recently sold not too long ago for, I want to say, like 20 grand. It was the only other one to exist. I'd have to check my facts on that, but you can look it up. It's fascinating. And Coca-Cola, the company themselves, actually has the other one that was produced. So they kind of tapered it, made it a little bit slimmer and easier to hold. And this is what we would consider our contour bottle today. Now, the really older versions of these are the ones you want to pay attention to. These have the embossing on the side. When you get into the late 50s, 60s, and 90s, you'll find that they have this kind of, I don't even know what you would call that, sort of like a painted white label here. The earlier ones are going to be the embossed ones, so you want to pay attention to those. These are a great example of a reproduction Hutchinson Coca-Cola bottle. Now, these were produced recently, actually. You can go to your local grocery store right now and find these. Coca-Cola put out a fun little throwback series of this bottle, and you can tell, obviously, right off the bat that this is not an original because it has a barcode. Well, barcodes came out in 1973, so this obviously isn't something that's very old. There's another great example of one that has the barcode on it. They also did these as a collector's item for an anniversary edition in the 70s. And then certain collectors clubs, there are lots of Coca-Cola collectors clubs that have done sort of special versions of these over the years for their members. And it will say property of Coca-Cola on the front, but it's not going to be a legit old bottle. And you can just sort of tell by the way the bottle is made, of course, looking for barcodes on the back, and the fact that it's going to be relatively inexpensive in price. Also, they would have come with a stopper in the top, and I'll show that here. The older bottles would have had, these would have had like a, not all of them are still existing with the stopper, but they would have had a cork stopper with a little metal ring that fit in the top. So some of the early ones that have that are very valuable. The reproductions, as you can see, were not sold with that. They were sold with just a regular Coca-Cola bottle cap on the top here. And the tops are a little bit of a different shape. So just something to pay attention to. Now, here's an example of those straight-sided paper label bottles. This is one that you'll see a lot. It was produced in 1974 for the 75th anniversary of the first Coca-Cola bottling company in Chattanooga, Georgia. That is the first bottling plant. I have been there. There's a fascinating story about the bottling plant. The bottling plant, they were supposed to sell the bottles for like $1, and then the dollar never got paid, but they still bottled all this Coke. It's just fascinating. It's really a great deep dive. That could be a whole nother triptych, the history of the first bottling plant in Chattanooga, but you'll find these a lot at the antique stores. The thing with these is, one, you can tell they're a reproduction because they've got the little logo on the back here that says they are. The other thing is This is not a paper label. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's like kind of painted on, or whatever the technique is they use. I'm not exactly sure how they make it, but you can feel it's kind of bumpy and textured and paint-like. It's not paper. So be aware of that. And also, as another reproduction, you will find that these paper labels are reproduced quite a lot. And you'll notice that they are a reproduction because the background where the Coca-Cola is inside of that center diamond is very uniform. It almost looks too perfect, and the paper is going to be really thick. An original one that's old is going to be very thin and brittle, and it's not going to have uniform texture. So be aware also when you're collecting just the labels, because those have value in and of themselves, that you're not getting something that's reproduction of those. Now, this is the earlier bottles I talked about. This is patented December 25th of 1923. This is an older bottle. Of course, different bottling plants are very collectible. This one is from New York City. You can always look on the bottom of these to see the city in which they were produced. And of course, if you can find certain bottling plants that are a smaller city or are no longer around, Palaca is a great example of a bottling plant that's no longer around, small little city. Those can be quite valuable. You know, we're not talking maybe hundreds of dollars, but a good chunk of change on those. So this is something, these older ones can be worth money, but they can also be not as expensive. So if you're wanting to get into Coca-Cola collecting, the bottles really are a great place to start. But you know you've got an older one when you got the embossing on the side and the city on the bottom. So you want to look for that. And then just pay attention. Coke did a lot of bottles that have been reproduced for collectors clubs, for bottling plants, for anniversaries, but they're always, always, always marked as such. So pay attention to those when you're looking. Now, this is something that I wanted to bring up because this is something I see quite a bit. These are flooded all over the market. These are reproduction bottle openers. Now, the original bottle openers were made in the 20s, and they have a lot of these reproduction ones that are just cheap metal. This one was made, it's the baseball player. It is very scarce. I've never seen one in person, but this was made from 1914 to 1920. Now, this here is a reproduction, and you can tell it right off the bat because notice the lettering on the back. See where this says Kansas City Coca-Cola? Well, that Kansas City font is very large, and it extends way over onto the leg. The original one is, one, going to be very scarce. Two, it's going to be very expensive if the seller knows what they have. And three, Canton, the word Canton ends right below where the leg of this guy starts. So this one is definitely not an original, and it is one that I see a ton. And this person is very kind and lists it as a reproduction. He's definitely done his homework, and it's certainly worth about $7. That personally, to get kind of a reproduction version of this, if you wanted to use it as a placeholder, would be definitely reasonable at $7.50. But just be aware that these bottle openers were reproduced a lot, especially the older ones. So if you see them cheap, just do your homework because there's a reason they're probably cheap. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is pocket mirrors, and these were reproduced in the 70s, but here's a picture of all the original pocket mirrors they made. These were made out of celluloid, so a very early form of hard, brittle plastic, and the imagery on these are amazing. They're so clear, they're so sharp, they're just absolutely an incredible piece of antique advertising, but the reproductions are not. So the reproductions, I mean, it's like you see those, and then you see this one, and it's like, ew, in my opinion. It's just so poorly done. You can just take an up-close look at the image. Look how fuzzy and grainy that is. It's not well made. The colors are just off. It doesn't look right. And they're made kind of out of a cheap plastic. So you can see that these are not, and this one here is not an original. Now, this person lists it as 1973, which is awesome. The one thing you want to be cautious of with these is the images will always be fuzzy, and that's something that I can spot a mile away. But what people often do with these is they will leave them in the rain to age. So they'll get a lot of rust around here where this is metal, where the metal meets the mirror, and they'll make it look old. And so then it becomes a little harder to distinguish if the person's selling it online, because they can take some really clever photos and make it look fake. So you got to be careful. And I will say that buying stuff off of eBay when it comes to Coca-Cola collecting can be really tricky, because if the seller doesn't take good photos of the marks, it's just hard to see. So a good seller, someone that deals in Coke, knows what they have, they will always, particularly with the trays, and I'll get to this in a minute, they will show really good detailed photos. They will show marks where they're supposed to be, and that way you really can trust them as a seller. And then, of course, anyone that lists things as 70s or reproductions, hats off to them. They've done their research, and they've made it a heck of a lot easier for us collectors to scroll through and say, nope, I'm not even going to look at that.
I've got a question, Katie. Could you go back to the picture from the book of all of those different mirrors?
Yes, sure can, Nate.
So I recognize a lot of these from trays, some of which you have behind you. Is there a corresponding tray to every one of these mirrors?
I believe there is, Nate. The only one I'm not sure of is the 1922 girl down here. I don't know if she was featured on a tray, but this is the Hamilton King girl. These were featured on some earlier round trays. Let's see, she's the Elaine girl tray. We've got, I think, the Betty girl. So yes, these are all featured off of early calendar images and trays. They were all put onto trays and calendars, and this is the same time frame where all of those would have been featured, that early amazing Coke advertising.
Great, thank you.
So Vinny actually found an original pocket mirror, and Vinny just has an amazing collection of Coke. And this is an original piece that he found from 1916 featuring the Elaine girl. And this is stunning, Vinny. I was so jealous when he got this, I gotta say. But I wanted to use this because he took a really great photo of it. You can see that this is celluloid. You can see that the plastic is just cracking a little bit. And look at the detail of this image. I mean, is this not clear and sharp and crisp? You can read the words Coca-Cola on the bottle really well. Now compare that to this reproduction. Can you see it? Can you see the differences? I can. This color is just not as vibrant. It's not the same as this girl. This girl has more of a golden yellow, I would say, and this is more of like a brighter, like orangey sun yellow, and the details just are not the same. Now on the mirrors, you can also look, and this is hard when you're shopping on eBay, but I have seen some of the mirrors down at the bottom along here. They will mark, similar to the trays, they'll put little marks on them indicating that they were made, 1916, 1920, whatever, and you can look for those. But of course, if they're as old as Vinny's is, sometimes it's hard to tell. But Vinny did a great job sleuthing, and he did come up with an original. And it's a stunning piece, Vinny. So very, very awesome, and a great way to distinguish between the originals and the reproductions. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about that comes up quite a bit when we're talking reproductions is the Coca-Cola glass. Now, the original Coca-Cola glasses were made in clear, and they were made from 1904 to about 1940 in this particular shape. And they have the acid etching on them. Now, there are glasses that have been flooding the market. I see these everywhere, and they are reproductions. So they're kind of modeled. They're kind of a marriage of two things. They're modeled to look like these old glasses, but they also have the look of a contour bottle. So these are ones that I see everywhere, and I just want to point these out because as a reseller, these are not worth really anything in my opinion, because you can pick them up at the dollar store. I can go across the street to my dollar store and buy 5 of these for $1. You can also buy them at the Coca-Cola store when you visit Atlanta, and they're wonderful pieces to have as everyday drinking glasses, but they are not an original Coca-Cola piece. And to be honest, if you see these out in the wild, just speaking from someone that collects true original Coke, they're not worth picking up because I just don't think they're going to sell for much more. You'd have to get it for like 5 cents, I think, to really make any money off of it. And the market's just so flooded with them that they're not really worth the pickup, in my opinion. Now, I'm not shaming anyone that has these. I know there's a lot of people that have them at home and they enjoy them. And again, with all of this collecting, it is what you enjoy. So if you are someone that doesn't want to spend a lot of money on original advertising and you're fine with the reproductions just to get the image, by all means, go for it. If you want these as your everyday drinking glasses, totally fine. Do whatever makes you happy. But just know from someone that collects original Coca-Cola pieces, these are not the kind of things that I want in my collection or that I'm necessarily looking for. You'll also find these drinking glasses in different colors. Now, I honestly don't know if they were sold this way or if people have stained them or left them out in the sun to get this color. I've really only seen them in the stores with that kind of Coca-Cola bottle green. So I don't know if these were adapted later, but I have seen them in many, many colors. And so when you see these, just know that they are not something that's really old. They are modeled to be kind of a mixture of the old style bottles and then those glasses that we saw on the previous page. Now, I want to talk about bottle carriers because these are things that I see come up a lot, especially around here. I think with the influx of farmhouse design, farmhouse style, people like these old like wooden crates. So they're very fascinated by them. And you'll find that these get reproduced a lot. Now, Coke made a lot of these. In fact, they're still making them. If you go to the Coke Museum, you can buy these. They're sold nowadays as utensil holders. So they're supposed to be like little caddies for your barbecues, your picnics, whatever. But originally, they would have been bottle carriers. And the early ones command a pretty high price tag. There's not many of them around anymore with the wooden ones. Now, there are metal ones that you can buy that are pretty easy to come by. They still hold their value, but they're a little bit more readily available than these wooden ones. So just be aware that these wooden ones are reproduced quite a bit. So here's a 1941 wooden crate. Notice that it's got this embossing on the side. Embossing is probably not the right word, but stamped image with the eagle on the side. It says Coca-Cola, and it's got a wooden handle. This would have been yellow. Now, yellow crates, yellow carriers, those are the earlier ones. The red ones are later, but you will find that people will take yellow paint and they will try to fake these. So you got to be careful with that. Here are an example of some of the metal ones that you'll find. These are pretty readily available. I have seen these reproduced as well, but what they'll do is they'll take, instead of having the individual slots for the bottles here, they'll take a front with, say, the Sprite boy or some other image, and then they'll just make it the same shape with the little cute carrier top, and it will just be kind of open for your utensils. It won't have the slots for the bottles. So just be aware that these are reproduced quite a bit. And they're listed as all kinds of things. The reproductions, you'll find them listed for letters. You'll find them listed for silverware. You'll find them listed as old bottle carriers. So really knowing what they made is something that's really key here to distinguish the reproductions. This one is a, quote, 6-pack bottle wooden carrier. Enjoy Coca-Cola. Now, mind you, the person has listed it at a very fair price, so this clearly is not an original. However, this is not something that I don't think Coca-Cola actually made. So this almost could be considered a fantasy item, but I included it in the reproductions because I see this a lot. People that love to do crafting, woodworking, whatever, they'll take old, beat-up Coca-Cola crates and they will make these like faux bottle carriers. They are not legit. Coca-Cola never made anything like this. You can tell that this is just sort of homemade. First off, you've got a side of an old red Coca-Cola crate, probably from like the 50s or 60s. You've got this wood piece here that's been cut out, and you can see the little staple hole. Now, the top is not that handle that we looked at previously. So this is actually a wood-turned handle, or maybe even a piece of something older. I don't even know if that's actually turned because it's got little holes. So this might have been for something else, and they've just kind of repurposed it to make the handle here. And you can tell that this wood is stained. They've also taken parts of other crates. So this was a part, this backside piece is actually from some other crate from 1898. Yes, this crate is old, the side of it, but this piece is not old. So they've just kind of taken a marriage of things and made this wooden Coca-Cola crate. Is it cute by itself? Is it something that would be nice in a vignette or display? Sure. Maybe it holds a little value because some of the pieces are a little bit older, but it's just not for me as a true collector. So just be aware that these things do exist. Another example is this here. This is something that they have modeled off of the original piece. You can see that it's got the little eagle wings with the Coca-Cola bottle, just like we saw. But pay attention to the way this is made. The early crates are going to be really nice construction, good joinery. This is just a nail that someone has made and put in there. Now, they did a good job. The edges are nicely met, but this is something that's not old. Now, you'll see that the front is stained. They've taken pieces maybe of another crate and made it. Now, they did make a bottle carrier with this style handle, but you can just tell by the joinery that this is not something that's actually legitimately old. So they did make several styles of this, one with that cutout handle, but not with this construction. You can just tell that this is something that's been manufactured. So let me show you an actual original one. This is a 1940s wooden Coca-Cola crate. And you can see here, that's the original image that would have been on here. It's yellow, so it's older. Of course, you do have to watch out for the paint. But look at the joinery here, folks. They have actually inset this piece. So they've made a really nice joint. All Coca-Cola crates, early crates, are well done because this was back in the time when manufacturing was not cheaply done. Everything was done well, and it was made to last. So you're going to have really good joinery, really good finish, and a really heavy, nice, hefty product. If you pick up one of these and it's like light, cheap balsa wood, most likely it is not a real piece. Old Coca-Cola pieces are going to have some heft to them because they're well made.
We've actually got a kind of a question / comment coming in from Elderly Poodle that now that you're showing us the real one, you showed us some of the ones from the book. I think her comment is, did they leave the carrier or just the bottles? I think we might be combining this with like milk carriers. How were these used? Like, were these sold in stores, or did you just buy the bottles and you were expected to bring your own holder to carry these, or who would have used these and when would they have been used?
That's a great question. These were actually sold with Coca-Cola in them at the stores on a store display rack. So these were before they had the paper cartons and then the metal crates. So let me go back to that image here so I can show you.
And then did you recycle the carton as well? Because these seem really well made to just like get rid of after.
Yeah. So a lot of times you could bring these back to the store. These were also used, these larger crates, like when you get into these were not something that was sold in the store. These would have been used by the carriers themselves, the people that brought the Coke to the store. Now these would have been recycled and reused. So you could bring them back to the store just like you would the bottles, and then they would refill them. So that's where these would have been used. And you can see here that this has the separators, and it is very well made. You can see the joinery here in this picture. Now, I want to bring this up as well while we're on the carriers. See this piece here? It's a Christmas piece. Coca-Cola did tons of Christmas stuff. They have been known for their Christmas stuff from the 20s on. They really invented the Santa, because Santa beforehand was quite kind of skinny and a little bit more worldly looking. They made Santa plump and jolly, and we really credit Coke with giving us the Santa that we know and all love today. And so you'll find that Coca-Cola Santa stuff has been reproduced. And that's a whole nother triptych by itself, is the sheer volume of stuff that you will find with Christmas reproductions. But this is a piece that I can imagine, I've never seen one, but I would imagine someone really wanting, because it's probably so rare. It's from the 30s and it's Christmas, probably someone trying to reproduce it at some point. So just be aware that those Christmas things are something that exist. And early images are going to command a high price tag, early pieces versus the reproduction. So this one here I talked about as an original. It's got that really nice handle. You can see how that's made. You can see that on the side, it's got some legit age to it. That's real rust. And then if you look at the top here, you can see on the sides, if I can get the right picture, you can see that that's metal. So they lined all of the sides of these with a thin metal strip. The reproductions do not have that. So that is something to be aware of as well. Now, picnic coolers are really fascinating to me. Coke made a whole line of picnic coolers, and I actually am lucky to own one of these. I got really lucky a few years ago and got a Cavalier cooler, and they made them in all different styles. But these are something that you can still buy today. So if you go to the Coca-Cola store, you can buy one of these. In fact, even magazines have partnered with Coke. Some of those magazines that sell patio furniture, home decorating items, you can buy Coke coolers. They're around, but you want to know about the originals, because the originals can command a big price tag, whereas the reproductions still have some more value. I would say they're probably one of the more valuable reproduction items, but they're not going to be really something that true collectors are going to want in their collections. Now, they hold a little bit more value simply because there's a lot of metal involved in making them, but not really because they're rare or scarce. So you can see just a variety of the picnic coolers they made. They made these from the 1950s through the 60s. I don't know if they had any of these in the 70s or not. I've actually, well, yeah, this one here. I've never seen any of the metal ones from the 70s, so I'm not 100% sure on that. The one I have myself is a Cavalier cooler, and it is similar to this one, but it doesn't have the ribbing on the front, and it has one of those handles that on the side it locks down, so you have to flip it up and open it. Now, original Coca-Cola coolers are going to be really heavy. Mine probably weighs, I kid you not, 20 pounds by itself. I don't know why they made them so heavy, probably to keep insulation in. But I mean, that must have been a thing to lug to your picnic. I can't imagine actually lugging one of those outside. They're so heavy. And the reproductions are heavy, but they're not as heavy because they're a cheaper metal. So if we go here, and we look at this, this is an actual legit old Coca-Cola cooler. Now, one of the things you want to look for with the Coca-Cola coolers is you want to look on the fronts, because the original ones are going to list who actually made them. So let me get a good picture here. See, this is Acton Manufacturing Company. Notice it has no zip code. It's made in the USA, and it has all of its patent information. When you look at old legit Coca-Cola coolers, you want to look for a panel of information on the front or on the side. Mine is on the side, and there were two big companies that made these Coca-Cola coolers for Coca-Cola. Acton is one of them. The other one is, as I mentioned, the one I have, which is a company that made probably the majority of them, which is Cavalier. So Cavalier also made some of the vending machines. They made a whole slew of things, but this is what you want to look for. So look for the panel with the embossing on the front. This says Acton Manufacturing Company, Arkansas. It's got made in USA, all of the patent information. The other thing you want to look for is legit age, dents, wear. All of these are probably, unless they were kept in a really nice spot where no one ever used them, they're going to have some legit age to them. You can just see this one was used. There's a dent. There's a little bit of rust. The other thing you want to look for, and the biggest thing, is on the inside. So these old coolers are going to have this sort of textured tin lining on the inside, and a lot of them came with a sandwich insert. These would have been used for sandwiches or small things that you wanted to put inside, maybe even bottles you can line up on the top. Now, some of the ones that are older have these pieces missing. Mine is actually missing the little top insert, unfortunately. But you'll always know the old ones because they've got that panel on the front and they have this lining on the inside. You can just see it's like a textured tin is the best way I can describe it. And they're heavy. Now let's take a look at the reproduction one. Look how shiny and new this metal is. This metal is very new. It is not textured. It is not that tin lining that you see on the other one, that kind of older tin. And it's a thinner lining. It's not as thick. You'll also notice on the front, if we go to a front picture here, it does have an embossed panel, but all it says is Coca-Cola Company, made in USA. It does not have any of the other information on it. And you can see how nice the white paint is. There's a little bit of bleeding from where they've sprayed the red, and the originals don't have that. Also, the white is just too perfect for this. It's just absolutely pristine. So pay attention to that, and those will help you with the coolers. The handles on the top are the same, but this metal is just way shinier and way newer. The other thing that I won't spend a lot of time on here, but these glass clock coolers, these are ones that were made in the 1920s through the 30s. Now, these would have been in stores or outside of stores. So you would have gone to a store, maybe your corner store or a grocery store, paid whatever it cost to buy a Coke, and then the person would actually open the sliding top and grab a Coke out, and then there's a bottle opener attached to the side. I believe Starex made a lot of those bottle openers. These were ones that are reproduced a lot. When you get into home decor, outdoor picnics and barbecues, you will find that you can buy these, and I can't think of the name of the magazine, but it's a catalog that I get a lot. It's one of those home decorating magazines for outdoor things. They're kind of expensive. You'll find that you could buy one of these for like $300 or something. They are reproduced. The original ones are probably pretty hard to find, and they might be in pretty rough shape unless someone has done a restoration on that. So just be aware that those do exist in magazines currently. So if you find one of these in an antique store, I would really do your homework before buying one of them to make sure that they're not something that someone found from one of those decorator places and then used to create like a cute vignette. Okay, we are now into the serving trays, and this is the area I feel that I really know the most about because this is my love and what I collect. I mean, I collect a lot of Coke things. I love Coke advertising, but the serving trays are just fabulous to me. They're great because they're not too large. They don't take up a lot of space. They have a great wall display, and there's a lot of thrill in finding an original one. But these were reproduced like crazy in the 70s. And I hate to say this, but I call these the plague, the reproductions, the plague of the Coca-Cola collecting world, because they're everywhere. And they're so easy to get confused with an original. And, you know, I never will shame anyone on eBay because I think a lot of people are listing these as original when they're not, but it's not because they're doing it to make a quick buck. I mean, in some cases that could be true, but I do think a lot of people just, they don't know, you know, so it's all about doing your homework and educating yourself. And you'll find these a lot in antique stores. I've seen reproductions everywhere, and they're good. The reproductions are good as placeholders. You know, I talk about that earlier in the triptych, but when you are collecting Coke stuff, especially older Coke stuff, sometimes if it's something you really want, you might buy a reproduction as a placeholder for a couple of dollars. And then when you get an original, you can sub it out. But I personally don't even want a reproduction tray in my collection. It's just not something that I want. I want the thrill of actually having something from the 20s, 30s, or 40s. So I collect trays from the teens all the way through the 60s. And then that is where I stop. And I don't have a lot of 60s trays. So this is just a picture from my book. And if you don't have Portretti's guide, you really need it. As a collector of Coke, this is your Bible. This is your guidebook. This is what you will refer to. And I use this page all the time. So this is the serving tray page. They made a ton of serving trays, Coca-Cola did. They made round ones in the early 1900s. They made square ones. They made a whole series of trays for the Mexican market and the Canadian market. I mean, it is unbelievable the amount of trays they made. So there's really so much to collect. And I don't know why that's not coming up here. I think somehow this got out of order. Here is the other serving trays. So this one right here, the 1957 Umbrella Girl, she was made for the Canadian market. Sometimes you'll also find her, there's an alternate version of her where the sides are in French. So that is something to look out for if you're collecting. But these were reproduced quite a bit. And you'll notice here that the ones that have the stars under them in the book indicates that they were reproduced. So there's a couple of them that if you know that they're not reproduced, then you know that you always will have an original when you find it, which I think is pretty cool. So this book, studying this little page here and really getting familiar with what was reproduced versus what wasn't, really will help you spot a tray and know whether it's a reproduction instantly. So let me show you some trays. We're going to take a look at some details because that is really where it matters. It's all about the details. So let me show you this one here. This is probably my very favorite tray, and it is hard to find in good condition. This is the Meet Me at the Soda Fountain Girl from 1930. It is the only Coca-Cola tray that has words on the image on the inside. So she's the only one to have something like this, which is pretty cool. But let me show you the details up close. So let's look at the bottom. Now, early Coca-Cola trays, the ones that were manufactured from 1900 to the war era, are going to have this special marking on the bottom. And this is what you want to look for, folks, on real trays. Pay attention to the tiny little strip on the bottom. And it's small, it's minute. So sometimes when you're looking at eBay listings, you got to get your magnifying glass out to check for this. But you want to look for these words. So the first series of words you're going to find on the bottom is Coca-Cola Company and then the year. So it's going to say the year. So this one was made in 1930. So you can see very faintly, but I can tell it's there. Coca-Cola in 1930 in gold lettering. The next thing you want to look for is American Artworks Inc., Coshocton, Ohio. Now, note that Ohio sometimes is spelled out on the late 40s to early 50s trays. The earlier ones usually just have OH or sometimes O, but just know there's a variance. But it will always say American Artworks Inc. They are the company that did all of the lithography and great art for these trays. They made a few signs as well. They're pretty amazing. There's a great video online if you want to get into American Artworks Inc. and their history. It's totally fascinating. And then the other thing you want to look for is Made in USA. Now, the early trays before the war, they did this in gold. When you get to the war time and afterwards, you'll see that they switched to using green lettering on the bottom, but you always want to look for those marks. Now, when you get into trays that are from around the late 50s to the 60s, not all of them are going to have these markings. The Menu Girl tray will not have it, and the girl with the wind in her hair will not have it. So I don't know why that got moved. Wait a minute, where did that go? Okay, so see this girl down here, the girl with the wind in her hair? She's got red hair. She does not have it, and the Menu Girl does not have it. So when you look, where did that go? I've lost this page now. I don't know what's going on with my tabs. But when you look for the Menu Girl, the Menu Girl does not have it either. But all of these earlier trays are going to have it in some form or fashion. So you want to look for that mark. It's very, very important. The other thing you want to look for is good detail. All of the trays are going to have, the original trays anyway, are going to have extremely good detail. The clarity of the image is going to be beautiful. It's going to be sharp. Even if it's got some wear to it, you can just tell it's a really good lithographed image. It's going to have really nice, vibrant gold detail or silver detail around the sides. It's not going to have sort of an antique-y, fakey gold. The other thing you want to look for, and this is very important in trays before the war, you're going to find that the swerve of the C has trademark registered in it. That's very, very important. It's a tiny detail, but it's important to pay attention to. Now, the trays after the middle of the war to the end of the war are not going to have that. They're going to have trademark registered under Coca-Cola here. But those trays, you'll know they're an original because most of them were never reproduced. So let me go back to this page here.
Before we go too much further, one clarification, you were talking about the marks at the text, like the Coshocton, Ohio. Do the ones that got reproduced in the 70s, do they say something different, or is there nothing in that little bar?
There is nothing in that bar on the reproductions. You will not find that at all. And the reproductions will always have trademark registered under the swerve of the C. The other way you can tell reproductions, besides not having the Coshocton, Ohio mark, not having the date, not having the Coca-Cola registered in the trademark of the C, and not having a really crisp image, is the backs. So all of the original serving trays were either made in black, green, or like a gray. So the early Elaine Girl tray, which is the long tray, and I wish my computer would cooperate here, and it's not, is going to be an actual kind of dark green color. And then when you get into the 50s trays, so late 40s, 50s, this girl here, the Roadster Girls tray, she is going to have kind of a gray back on her. And then all of these have dark backs. They're all going to be black. You want to look for that black back. Now, you have to be careful because I have seen people take a 1970s tray and paint the backs black. So beware of that. But you can always spot those because they don't have the Coshocton, Ohio mark. Now, I was talking earlier about good eBay sellers. A really good eBay seller will know, someone that actually deals in Coke will know that it is important to show these marks. So this person has done their due diligence. They've listed it correctly as a 1930s tray, and they've taken a really good photo of those marks because they know true collectors are looking for this mark on the bottom. So you want to look for that. And there it is, American Artworks Inc., Coshocton, Ohio. And then the back of this is black. You can see that here. So those are things that you want to pay attention to when you're looking for trays. Here's the Roadster Girls tray, and this is what I was talking about. In the war happened, and then they changed the way they marked their trays. So they didn't put the trademark in the swerve of the C. They actually put it under, and it will say Reg US Patent Off right under the word Coca-Cola. Now, a little memory trick here that helps me out a lot is any of the Coca-Cola trays that have this silver striping around the outside, those are trays that were never reproduced. All of the ones with the silver striping were never reproduced. So if you find those, hey, you've got an original. It's fantastic. And you'll notice on the bottom, I hope this will show up. There's the trademark Reg US Patent Off under the swerve of the C. The back is kind of this gray color. And then down at the bottom of this tray, I wish it would show up. It may not, but those are actually green letters. They are not that gold lettering. So just be aware that they did change the letter color, but they still are legit pieces. You can kind of faintly see that it's green there in that silver bar. But this is the Roadster Girls tray. She was never reproduced. One of my favorites as well from 1942. Now this girl, the Flapper Girl, yeah, she's reproduced a lot. Unfortunately, I find her pretty much everywhere. And I would say she's the plague of the tray world because you'll find her and she's not real most of the time. And there's a very simple trick to her. The way that you can tell an original from a fake right off the bat is this little bottle in the corner. The real ones do not have the bottle. So if you find her in the square shape without 5 cents on the glass, it will say Coca-Cola, and her hat is like a really nice blue color versus this weird blue color, and the bottle is not here, you got an original. But if the bottle's there, nope, she's a 1970s repro. You can also tell that the trademark is not in the swerve of the C, and she does not have any of those markings on the bottom. She is just bare. And a lot of the reproductions, thank you, Nate, a lot of the reproductions will either have a weird back that someone has painted darker, like this is a weird green color, or they'll be like a mustard. Now, I do want to point out Coca-Cola made tip trays. They are smaller little trays. Those tip trays, the original ones, actually do have a mustard back. So that gets confusing because the reproduction trays a lot of times have a mustard back, but the little tip trays actually originally came with a mustard back, mustard yellow color. This is the 1916 Elaine Girl tray. She is another one that I see all the time everywhere, and she is not an original most of the time. This is the only tray Coca-Cola made in this elongated shape. Now, I was talking about the gold, and this is a really great photo. So you can see that this is sort of a weird antique gold versus the one that we looked at on this girl here. Look at that gold. This is like a really, really nice, shiny, true like gold. This girl here, the Elaine girl tray, that's the original. She is a weird gold. She's sort of like a green gold. It just doesn't look right. She's very fuzzy, as you can see around her hat. She doesn't have the trademark and the swerve of the sea, and there are no markings on the bottom. So she is not an original, and she has this weird kind of gray back. I've also seen people paint this back mustard yellow, which is not right either. The original, look how good that gold is. Isn't that gold just spectacular? It's very different than that kind of weird faked gold. You'll also notice that she's got the trademark and the swerve of the sea. And down at the bottom, she does have her marks, and she's got the green back. So she is a legitimate 1916 piece. Fantastic. So love her. They list her as 1916, and I think I originally had said she was, 1916. So there we go. Anyway, she's fantastic. So look for those marks on the trays. The biggest thing is always looking for the Coshocton, Ohio mark and the trademark and the swerve of the sea, except for those trays I showed you after the war that don't have that mark.
Is 160 US a good price for that tray?
Yes, that's a very good price for that tray. You'll see that tray go way higher. She's becoming harder and harder to find. And this one here, unfortunately, someone has taken a nail. Please don't do this if you have an original tray. Hang them with a nice back. Don't jam a nail through an original 1916 tray, please. That would be really helpful. But despite that little damage, she is in really pretty good shape for her age, to be honest. So I think that I think for me, that's a fair price. It's good detail. The other thing you'll see faked a lot, or reproduced, I should say, not faked, is the Hamilton King girl. I am lucky to own her. She is a very, very hard tray to come by. She is called the Hamilton King girl because she is signed Hamilton King. She has a different marking on her. That's why I wanted to show her. The original one has a little tiny mark in the bottom that's circular, and it's different than some of the other trays that you're going to find. But she does have the trademark in that tail or the swerve of the sea. Her colors are very vibrant. You will always be able to tell that gold is just so nice. When you see the golds in person, you can instantly tell them apart because this is just such a true, amazing lithographed gold that you can't get with the reproductions. The reproduction of her is clearly very different. Just the shape alone. Look how flat this top is, and it's kind of more elongated. It doesn't curve up on the sides. It's very different, and it doesn't have that border around the outside. But you'll find her a lot. Now, this person listed her as 1909, but they did say that she was from 1971. So yay for them. And a $12 price tag is very fair for this reproduction. There's that kind of mustardy yellow back I was talking about. It's just a weird color versus the original, which is sort of this darker green back. So pay attention for all of those details. Now this tray gets faked and reproduced a lot. I have seen people paint the backs of this tray trying to pass it off as an original. This features, of course, Tarzan, Johnny Weissmuller, and Maureen O'Sullivan. This tray is one of the most desirable Coca-Cola trays simply because it features some very famous stars on it. This is an original, and you can tell that because it's got trademark and the swerve of the sea. It's got all of the details on the bottom. They are there. They might be a little bit worn, but I can see they're there. And the easiest way to spot the differences, besides the fact that this is extremely, the reproduction is extremely fuzzy, is you can see the colors around the outside. So notice that going from the center image to the outside of this sweeping curve of the red, you'll notice that this is green. See how that's like green with a little bit of a gold band, and then it goes into this red? The reproduction is completely different. It has a red and a gold line. It's a weird gold. See, this does have the trademark and the swerve of the C, but it does not have any of the marks on the bottom, and it's very pixelated and fuzzy. It just doesn't look right. So this $29, a little high for the reproduction, but this person at least has listed it as a repro, so they have done their job, and I'm very proud of them for that.
Now, what was the text to the right of Johnny Weissmuller in that reproduction? Because there was text there, but you said that's not the Coshocton text.
No, the original one has text as well, and it just says Marino Sullivan and Johnny Weissmuller, and then it has something else, something players in it is what it says. It's just a little note about them on the side. The reproduction has it as well, but notice that it's a weird color. The text color is not the same as the original, and it's fuzzy. Now, the last thing that I want to showcase here before we move on to fantasy items, and I know that this is running a bit long, but there's just so much to cover with Coke. Coca-Cola made a lot of vintage 90s trays. Now, these are not the original serving trays that would have been used in the soda fountains. These are more like lap trays, things that you would buy at a Coca-Cola website or a store and then serve your food on. There are a ton of these with images from the past that bring a lot of nostalgia and good feeling and bring you that really happy feeling that Coca-Cola has worked so hard to create in their advertising, but they are reproductions from the 90s or 2000s. One way you can always tell them apart from legit trays, one, if you have the book, you can see that they actually never made this back in the day. The other thing is they'll always usually have a write-up on the back, so it will tell you, like, this image is taken from this Santa Claus in such and such a time, and it usually will have a barcode. So here it gives you a little write-up. Every year since 1930, the Santa Claus has appeared on posters, Christmas cards, magazines, and numerous other things. So they have a little write-up, and you'll see these a lot on eBay and online. So just be aware that those do exist, but they're not actually considered serving trays that we would think of them in the sense of serving them in the soda shops. So just know that those exist. The other last thing I want to talk about with repros, simply because I see this a lot, they're everywhere, is these lamps. Now, Coca-Cola did lamps. They did a series of these Tiffany-style lamps in the 20s. Of course, original examples are probably going to be pretty expensive. In 1990, the value on this was $5,000. I'm assuming they're even harder to find. The original ones are pretty easy to spot because they will say property of the Coca-Cola company to be returned on demand around this silver band up at the top. And these guys are probably things that you're just not going to find at an antique store laying around, but I do see them listed on eBay a lot. You can see the market is pretty much flooded with these Tiffany style lamps. This one is actually plastic. These other ones were used probably more recently, 90s to 2000s. I've seen them used over pool tables and bars. I've seen them in, I even want to say like Pizza Hut had one of them on over one of their tables. So these are reproductions. You can buy these at the Coca-Cola store now. You can buy pretty much all of these things now, but they're modeled. Just know they're modeled after the 1920s pieces, and they are real glass, so they do hold some value because they're glass and they're fairly well made, but they're not going to be an original one from the 1920s. So just know that you're going to see these a lot. As a reseller, I would not pick these up to resell, to be honest. I think some of the prices are just kind of crazy. They're all over the board, and trying to ship something like this would just be a pain. So I don't recommend that. Last thing I wanted to just bring up quickly, and I won't be able to cover this all today. Signs are something that Coke has made literally hundreds of. There's all different types of signs Coke made. They made button signs, which are those round signs. They made porcelain signs. They made flange signs, arrow signs, 10-tacker signs, hanging signs. I mean, amazing list of signs they made. These are reproduced a ton. These are probably some of the things that I see most next to the trays. You can go onto the Coca-Cola website right now, signs and wall decor, go to that page, and you'll see all of these signs are taken from earlier images. Here's a great example. Here's an arrow sign. Here's, this was taken off of a sign that had a picture of the 6-pack bottling, and it was a 10-tacker sign. I think that was made in the 40s or 50s originally, and now this one's being sold. It's just like a die-cut metal sign. This one I see a ton, this Coca-Cola bottle. It is a reproduction of an earlier sign. They also have images here. So this one is a print from an earlier food advertising campaign Coke did. You will find a lot of these signs modeled for people's houses where they're like, stay refreshed, come in and have a Coke, delicious with food. Be very mindful that these things are a dime a dozen. And you can usually tell these because they're flimsy metal. I have picked up one of these at one point, this Coca-Cola ice cold vintage sign. I could literally shake it back and forth and hear it flop. An original sign would never do that. So you can kind of spot these pretty easily. Some of them are also made out of aluminum, and if you stick a magnet to it, they're not going to hold. Also know that this sign here with the evolution of the bottles is something that Coca-Cola recently made and put onto a t-shirt, but it was never an original sign. Looking for details on signs are really going to be your best way. Signs are hard, and I am no expert by any means with signs because there's just so many of them, but just be aware that they are reproduced. The fishtail images, the food images, those are reproduced a lot. But I have a couple of original signs I was able to authenticate. This one has a tiny mark on the bottom. You'll find a lot of the original ones will say PM, which is a company, and they'll have either a date next to it or a number. This one is the MCA Sign Company, number 747. It has some legit rust to it. It's a 10-tacker sign, so meaning that it had holes where they literally would have just tacked it up to a wall in a store. The other thing that you're going to find in the world of signs, and I'll show you some pictures here. I don't know what has happened, unfortunately, to all of the images that I uploaded. I guess that they've all gone away. I don't know what's going on with my tabs here. I'll try to close some of these. Maybe they'll come back. I don't know what happened, but just look for those. Also note the buttons are reproduced a lot. The buttons are porcelain signs. They're very heavy. And so that can be confusing as a collector because they did reproduce those and they're heavy. They're still the same heft, but those are usually marked as a reproduction. And the thing that I find interesting about the button signs, which are those round buttons, we're all used to seeing them. They're probably one of the most famous Coca-Cola signs. Cracker Barrel actually is the reason why they're hard to find. I blame Cracker Barrel because I know the guy that actually is in charge or was in charge of buying all of Coca-Cola's, all of Cracker Barrel's antiquities. And he is a very highly well-respected sign collector and dealer. He actually has a booth here in Jacksonville, and I got to talk to him. His name is Jim. Very, very nice guy. And he told me that he spent his whole career buying signs in Atlanta, primarily for Cracker Barrel. And all of the Cracker Barrels that you go visit across the country have an original button. They are not reproductions, and that is the reason why they have the corner market on the buttons. And the button signs are becoming harder and harder to find. So blame Cracker Barrel for that. And also know when you go in there, they don't have any fake antiques on their walls. They're actually all legitimate stuff, which I find really fascinating. So signs could be a whole nother triptych. Maybe we'll do that another day. They're just hard to authenticate. Feel the weight of the piece. Look for marks like this, the MCA Sign Company. Look for good prices. Signs, they're going to command money. That's just the truth of the matter. Unless you find something that's got a lot of wear, be prepared to pay several hundred, if not $1,000 or more for a sign. So if you find a sign, again, goes back to this cheap price thing, that's like $23, be leery of it. Yeah, you could get lucky and score a really great sign that was from the 20s for that price because someone didn't know what they have, but most likely that's not going to be the case. So just pay attention to that. Try the magnet trick. And if all else fails, you can always reach out to antique dealers, build relationship with people at your antique mall that specialize in advertising, and get their number and say, hey, I'm looking for this. And I send stuff to Jim all the time. I say, hey, is this real? And he'll authenticate it because he's been in the sign business for over 50 years dealing in just Coca-Cola advertising. So that's really my best tip with the signs. But I'll tell you what, they're hard because there's a lot of reproductions out there. Okay, folks, we are going to briefly jump into fantasy items. I won't cover everything. There's just so much in the world of Coke. I'm telling you, the amount of stuff they made, it's unbelievable. So we're going to talk a little bit about fantasy items. Fantasy items are items that actually were never made by Coke. They never were licensed by Coke. And they are things that people have taken and they have made themselves and slapped the Coke logo on it. It is illegal, but it is something that is out there, and they are things that Coke never produced. So these items have value in and of themselves as a piece of so-called fake or reproduction, but they're not going to hold the value at all that real Coca-Cola pieces do. The biggest thing with fantasy items that I find is that people that are new into collecting or people that are antique dealers, they find these things and they can't find another one like it, so they suddenly assume it's rare. These are not rare. They might be unique, sure. They're items that someone has made or another company has put out without the knowledge of Coke, but they're not rare. They're not some 1920s thing that no one's ever found before that's suddenly worth $2,000. So just be aware of that. Now, there are people that actually just collect the fantasy items because of the novelty of it. And certainly that is an interesting area. If you want to spend time looking and researching and collecting those things, you certainly can. But they're not something for me as a collector that I want. And they are things that I see a lot in antique stores. And I want to make you guys aware of it. So when you're in antique stores, you see these things and you don't go to the mindset of, oh, wow, that's so rare or so unique or so, they are unique, but I mean, they're not scarce. That's really my point here. So this is something I see a lot in the antique stores. This is it came out in the 70s, 1974, Flapper Girl art. Now, she was taken off of a calendar. So she was taken off of a very early calendar, and they made her into a tray. Coca-Cola never made this piece. She is a true fantasy item. Again, as I mentioned, the only long tray that Coke ever made was the Elaine Girl tray. They never did any other long trays like this. So this is definitely a fantasy item, and it's one that you see a lot. She's pretty much everywhere. So if you look at her, she was taken off of the 1921 calendar. It's the same image, just put onto a tray, but she is not legit. So she is, in fact, a fantasy item. Now, this piece is something that I want to talk about. This is the doll that Coca-Cola did. This is something that you'll find a lot of, and the originals are pretty hard to find. They are the, I think it's Buddy doll. I'll have to get the exact designer name. But this is the fantasy item that they made of him. He is not actually, wait a minute. I see what happened. Some of these went over. Some of these went over onto the.
Vinny says it's the Buddy Lee doll.
Yeah, thank you. Buddy Lee doll. That's the name I was looking for, Vinny. I appreciate that. So this one here is a fantasy item. I don't believe Coke ever made it. And you can see here that he's got a different face to him than the original. And the original has really detailed eyelashes. It's going to have Buddy Lee stamped onto the back. He's going to have this green pinstripe jacket, and he'll have some markings on the belt buckle. The fantasy item does not. That's the Buddy Lee doll. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Sprite Boy. The Sprite Boy is quite interesting. He was actually only around for a very short time. He was around during the war and then through the early 50s. And basically, he was invented as a way to lift people's spirits. Now, to be honest, I find him quite creepy. I do not like the Sprite Boy. Out of all the stuff Coke did, I'm like, why? He doesn't seem very spirit boosting to me. It seems more something of nightmares, but people like him. And I mean, look at that face, just pure devilish. I don't know what's going on there, but he is something that is reproduced on everything. And he was only around a short time. So really during the war and through like the early 50s, and then he was gone. And they didn't put him on tons of stuff. He was on a few signs, a few advertising pieces, but he wasn't heavily used. So when you get into reproductions and fantasy items, I think that novelty of him being around for such a short time and the fact that he's a sprite, kind of pixie like, however you want to say, people like to put him on things. So just be aware that when you see, typically my rule of thumb is when I see the Sprite Boy, I just automatically assume he's not legit until I can prove otherwise, because he was around for such a short time, and real true Sprite Boy items will be very expensive. They're not going to be cheap. This piece here is something that is a complete fantasy item Coke never made. Actually, this is one of the first Coke items I bought because I did not know that it was a fantasy item. Luckily, I only paid about $2 for it. I was not taken for a starting bid of $30. This person just doesn't know that it is not actually made by Coke because it does have the Coke logo. It is celluloid. It's got this weird celluloid wrapper, and what it is, it's a little sewing kit with the Sprite Boy. But he was never made by Coke. He's kind of a cool piece if you want to put him in a printer's tray or something, but I certainly would not say he's worth $30. These fantasy items are going to be worth, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of Coca-Cola collectors, about $5 to $20. They're just not worth a ton. So unfortunately, he's not actually a legit Coca-Cola piece. Now, this piece, I was talking to Venny, and I agree with Venny. It's not really a repro or a fantasy item, but I've included him in the fantasies tab because I felt that he fit best here. This was actually used for the 8th National Convention, and they made a Coca-Cola Sprite Boy tray in 1982. So they only made a few of these. He's actually something that you don't find come up for sale a lot. I think more of them have come up for sale. And this is the rare exception to the rule. This guy does actually bring some money because he was made for a convention. They didn't make very many of them. So he's kind of collectible in and of himself. But he's not something that Coke actually originally did. So if you like the Sprite Boy, and there's, out of all the Sprite Boy things that are kind of reproduced in fantasy, he would be something that would fit more into my collection if I had to choose something that wasn't original. But he's not really something I'm after. Now, Vinny really likes this tray. He's got a really great pristine condition piece that he found of this, which is fantastic. So I just wanted to include him to make it known that he's not something that was actually done by Coca-Cola back in the day, and it is marked the Coca-Cola clan. So when you see these, I mean, they're pretty easy to distinguish, and it's got the mark on the back, 8th Annual Coca-Cola Clan Convention, 1982. So it is well documented, but it is something that you see occasionally, and this would be my exception to the rule. If you do find one of these as a reseller, I would pick this up because it is desirable and it is something that people want as far as collecting goes. So that's kind of the only exception to the rule with fantasy and repro items being worth money. Usually they're not, but that one is, and that's the only thing I would pick up for resale if it were me. This piece is something I find really interesting, and this goes into the fantasy thing really well. A lot of fantasy items are tricky because they are actually pieces that look and feel old, and actually in some cases may be legitimately old. In the case of this piece, this is actually a real antique milk glass tray. You can see the ring of fire around the milk glass here, which just means those edges are translucent when held up to the light. So that's kind of indicative of early milk glass. But what has happened here is someone has taken a decal and put Coca-Cola decal and the 5-cent mark on it. And this goes back to what I said earlier. When you find things with the 5-cent mark, you got to be kind of skeptical because that's really, in the world of Coca-Cola, that is early advertising. So to find something with a 5-cent mark for a decent price, not really something you're going to come across every day. And this is something that for a collector or a reseller can be confusing because, yes, as my mind as a reseller, I'm going, yeah, that's a legitimate old piece of milk glass. That has some value. But the fact that it has Coca-Cola on it doesn't add any value additional to it. And there's no additional value just because it says Coke. This was decaled on, and it was never actually produced by Coke. And it is not something that, it may be rare in the world of fantasy items, as in that it doesn't come up for sale much, but it is not something that is rare in the world of Coke. And most Coke collectors will have no desire to pick this up. The next thing is when you go on to eBay. I don't know what has gone on funky with all of my tabs. There we go. When you go onto eBay, you'll see these a lot. I see these at antique stores. These are Coca-Cola mirrors, and they have old images on them. So they look really antique. They've got some cases of really old wood frames. I've seen people put these in like legit antique frames. You can see this person has tried to do that a little bit. They've tried to mimic the older frame, but it's not. These pieces were never made by Coke. They are popular in people's houses that do decorating because they think it's kind of neat to have something that's vintage inspired, or in their pub or bar. This person has it listed as a bar sign, and that's probably what it was sold as when it came out as a fantasy item. But this was never made by Coke, and these are a dime a dozen. The fact that this person is asking $130 for this, I'm sorry, I find that completely insane. I don't think that they know that it's a fantasy item. This, in my world, would be worth about $25, and that's all the money in it. So just steer clear of these mirrors. I just don't think that they're worth picking up. The other thing that is kind of interesting is these little tokens. Now, I see these a lot. These were never made by Coke, but they were used in places that would sell Coca-Cola. So think like bars, restaurants, cruise ships. They would put Coca-Cola's name on it without Coca-Cola really knowing about it, and then they'd use it as a drink token. So you can actually take it to the bar. You would get, turn it in, and you'd get a Coca-Cola or a drink. Coke never made these. They're not rare. They're pretty much all over the place in price. I would say that these are worth about $5. That's all I would be willing to pay for one if I were to have one in my collection. They're neat things for printers trays, but Coke never made them, and I see them oftentimes listed as rare, and I see the prices really all over the place for these. There's several styles. This one has a nod to the Betty girl, so it says, Betty says, this drink is on the house, Atlanta, Georgia, in this kind of round, almost club-like shape. They also made them in these style. These are the ones I see the most of. Now, this is for the Irving, California metal coin gaming token. So Palace Park. I don't know where this is in Irvine or anything really about it, but you'll find that a lot of places will put their name and then the little Coca-Cola logo on the front. Now, these are pieces that might have some value to people that like Palace Park or Irving, California. So there is some cross collectability here, but they're not really worth a ton because Coke never made them. The other thing that you'll see are these kind of stop sign shaped looking ones, good for one free bottle. A lot of times you'll find these with like 1915 to 1916, and they look old, but they're not. And this is a great thing that Nate brought up earlier. And you can see here, 2 or more, $8.96 each. Okay, well, something from 1915 is probably not going to have 8 available. So just be aware of that when you're shopping on eBay, and know that these are not made by Coke. The other thing you'll find is this, and this is claims to be a 1904 St. Louis World's Fair piece. This is not. These are antique brass. And I will say the person has done a good job. They put antiqued brass. That word to me is kind of an indicator of something that's not legitimately old. But I have seen these listed as like rare 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. No, they're not. Coke never made this. They're little money clips. And they have like a little write-up thing here. I don't know where these, that you'll always see that they say Tiffany's Studios on the back, St. Louis World's Fair, 1904 patent pending. They're not old. And I don't know who made these. I don't know how these came about. I really don't know much more about them other than Coke never made them. And they're passed off as old a lot, and they're not. This person obviously has 4 or more for $10.40 each. So, I mean, if you want like a money clip, they're not bad, but $11 is probably all they're worth, to be quite fair. Now, this is interesting. This goes back to what we were talking about with the milk glass. And this is something that I could see that as a new collector would be really confusing. As someone that's in the antique business, this could be really confusing because this is an item that is legitimately old that they've added something that's not old to. And I find that just a little bit dirty, to be honest. But this is an antique national cash register. So yeah, this is a legitimately old antique national cash register, probably from the 1900s with the brass and the marble slab. But Coca-Cola never made any cash registers with 5 cents Coca-Cola brass sign topper. They never did anything like this. So this is something that I really can't tell you as far as value goes. I don't know how much these original cash registers, the national cash registers, are worth. I know that they're old. I know that probably a lot of them don't come up for sale in working condition. So I don't know if this price is fair for the cash register by itself, but it is not fair with the Coca-Cola sign on it. So in other words, what I'm saying is if you find these, you might get money for the cash register because yes, it's legitimately old. It's a collectible antique, but you're not going to get more just because it has Coca-Cola on it. And just know that Coca-Cola never did any type of thing like this. This was nothing that they used in advertising. This, you see, it says drink carbonated. So they're trying to pass that off as really old when carbonation came into it. They're also using that 5 cents, which I see everywhere. So Coke never made this, but it is an interesting piece to take a look at. And I guess you could remove that if you wanted to just buy the cash register by itself. But again, I'm not up to date on cash register values, but I know National is a good brand. The other thing here that you find a lot of are these little boots. I see these everywhere. Now this person, they've listed it for $50, and I'm sorry, it's just not worth that. These were never produced by Coke. They are kind of modeled after an actual Coke piece. So Coke did make a boot, but they made it in 1920, and they made it in a bone handle. So they never made this brass piece here with the truck and the bottles on the back. And you can see it's got like USA stamped into it. So it really does look legitimately older, but it's not something made by Coke, and it's not worth $50. And unfortunately, this person just doesn't know. And I'm not blaming the sellers here because as a new collector, I'll tell you, it was very hard when I first started collecting Coke when I saw these things in antique stores because I had no clue. I was like, well, it looks old. And so it was just this game of playing sleuth and trying to figure out what is legitimately old and what isn't and what wasn't made by Coke. This is another thing I see a lot. In fact, our antique mall gets these in regularly. These are vendor pins, and people claim that they're licensing badges for vendors. They were put on, I've seen them put on like Coca-Cola uniforms. They were never produced by Coke. I think they're probably worth about $12, as this person has. And they've tried to make it look old. So look, they've got the pin back extending past the clasp. For all of us brooch lovers, this does look old. They've got the older C clasp, but it's not that old. It's probably 70s or 80s piece. And it was never made by Coke. And they've tried to put all these scrolls and stuff to make it look old too, but it's not. This person, they just listed it as new. So yay for them. They know what they have, which is fantastic. This is something I see that people have listed a lot. Coke never made this. I see it listed as 1950. They did make a lot of these little bottle-shaped pieces with the knives, but they never made any, to my knowledge, with this little keychain thing here like this. They've got a loop. The real ones have a loop. And so this is considered technically a fantasy item.
Now, Katie,
yes.
You had talked on this a little bit. There was a question earlier about whether Coke like tried to crack down on anything. We've talked about this, about how eBay can get involved in things. Is like these items that are clearly that have been faked or are clearly doing this outside of the knowledge of Coca-Cola. Does eBay try and step in and stop this, or is it as long as it's being listed as new or being listed as whatever, does eBay let it go through?
eBay lets it go through, I believe. I've never heard of eBay cracking down on anyone. But I will say, with the trays, I had a situation where I took a gamble on a tray. I didn't pay too much for it. I think I paid about $40, and it was the Johnny Weissmuller tray. And the lady just didn't take very good photos. And from what I could tell from the photos she took, it looked legit. The back was right. I mean, she'd gone to some length to make this thing look real. And that's getting into the area of faked items. And I got it, and I could just tell immediately. I was like, no way, this is not a legit tray. And I emailed her and I said, and I sent her pictures from my book. I said, here is why this is not a legit tray. Now, I'm not saying she was the one that faked it. I have suspicions, though, to believe that she was, although I think that I will give her the benefit of the doubt and say she bought it that way and didn't know, but I really don't think so. And I emailed her and I sent her all this and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not willing to pay this price for something that I don't want in my collection. And I said, I'm sorry, but you listed it as an original. It's not. And she was not particularly nice. And I'll just say she didn't want to help me in any way, shape, or form, and told me basically to shove it, and I was stuck with it. And I called eBay and I said, look, this lady has listed this as a real piece, and it's not. And I got all my money back, and I don't know what eBay did, but they took care of it. So they will stand by their buyers. So if you find something like that and you get, if you buy something and you realize, okay, it's not real and they've listed it as real, you can go to eBay and tell them, and they'll, for the most part, they'll stand by you if you have the claims to back it up. So this is a piece here. Patrick actually found one of these and sent me a picture of it. And immediately I was very leery because I had never seen anything like it. And I thought, yeah, that just looks kind of too new. And Patrick wasn't sure either. And he didn't pick it up, which I was glad, because I looked in my book and turns out it is a fantasy item. This is a glass plate that was made in the 70s featuring the Betty Girl. And it says push, but she was actually never made by Coke. So very interesting. It's a unique piece. The other thing that's pretty wild that is in the world of fantasy items is this bicycle. Coke never made bicycles. They never put their logo on bicycles, but this bicycle has been adapted with the Coca-Cola logo and a little cooler on the front. But it is a fantasy item, and no such item really does exist other than this fantasy piece. So they never made an original one in the world of Coke. The other thing that I want to talk about again is gum, and I bring this up again because the gum is quite reproduced. It's a fantasy item I see a lot of. In fact, about a month ago, I was looking on eBay, and I saw this paper, I think it's paper basically, or a thick cardboard sign listed, and the person said rare gum advertising display, Coca-Cola, $1,000. It's like, yeah, that looks kind of fishy, because I've never seen, and I've seen some of the gum stuff, and I thought, yeah, that's just something right there. Well, I looked in my handy old guidebook, Love Petretti's, and sure enough, it was a fantasy item. And what this person has done, whoever did this, I'm not exactly sure.
I like that, Kenny. That's brutal, where he's got their value, ... worthless.
Yes, and it's interesting because, you know, the guy that wrote this book, he obviously collects some of the mintiest of mint collectibles. He is extremely knowledgeable on Coke. He has he's got gum, he's got original cigars, he's got the Coca-Cola sandwich press from the 30s. I mean, all kinds of signs. Amazing, amazing collection. In fact, you can look his collection up online. It's almost like a museum. And so coming from his standpoint, of collecting. To him, yeah, this is absolutely worthless. And he mentions in the book that, you know, he realizes it has some value in the fact that people do collect fantasy items and that it is a value. But he says he, knowing what he knows and being a collector, he does not feel right putting a value on something that was legitimately ripping off Coke. And I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. But yeah, it is kind of brutal, worthless. Yeah. Here is, let me go to the gum crate. Where is that? Oh boy. How are my tabs? I don't know what happened, guys. The tabs just got all wonkadoodle. So this is some of the gum stuff they made, but what I wanted to show you, if my tabs here will cooperate, I don't know why it's just deleting photos off of the Google photo thing. Well, it is not here. Well, anyway, you can imagine a wooden crate, and you can imagine that this image was on the side of a wooden crate. So they have taken this image from the wooden crate and put it onto a paper sign that really never existed. Coke never made. They did make the wooden crate for the gum, but they never made this sign. So if you see this, it is not something that was made by Coke. The other thing I see a lot of, and I've seen this over the years at antique stores, is they take Fiesta-ware pitchers. So this is the case of something being legitimately aged with an old Fiesta mark, and they put Coca-Cola on the side. So they decoupage it. This was never made by Coke. So there it is. They came in yellow, blue. I've seen white. I may have seen green, I think, at one point. They made them in all different colors. And if you see these with Coke on the side, know that they're fantasy items, never made by Coke.
Is that the same decal that was on the milk glass?
Yes,
tray?
very similar decal.
Similar. Okay. It looked like identical except for the last
It
one.
looks almost identical, and it could be the same, but I'm just going to say similar because the sizing looks a little different. So I don't know in scale what the size would be, but yeah, very similar, if not the same decal. The other thing that you'll find a lot, again, I talked about the gum, and this happens with items that are rare. When Coke made some of these scarce, they made gum for such a short period of time, and they made advertising to go along with it. And that advertising nowadays is very scarce. It's very hard to come by. I don't use the word rare often, but it is. Coca-Cola gum stuff is just rare. A lot of people like to try to put it on newer or quote unquote like old milk glass things here and try to pass it off as a real thing, and it's not. Coke never made this. Again, there's that stupid 5-cent thing on the front that just is everywhere. And then they have Chew Pepsim Gum Spearmint, and they have the seemingly old looking milk glass jar with a wooden top, but Coke never made it. They did, however, there's the picture of that crate that I was looking for that I couldn't find with the Coca-Cola gum. I don't know why all of a sudden all of these tabs are just appearing. It's really bizarre. Something weird with the tabs. So this piece here was actually never done by Coke. Now they did make these, and these are the true old gum jars. When you find these, you'll find them oftentimes as another candy jar, because Franklin Gum Company, Franklin made jars, lidded jars like this for many companies back in the day that sold candy, gums, and other type things like this. They made a wide variety of jars. So these jars without the Coca-Cola logo are very valuable by themselves. Anything by the Franklin Company you want to look for. But if you can find them with the Coca-Cola Pepsim gum label, you've got something that's worth a pretty penny. But they never did anything like that milk glass jar that we saw, and they never made anything like this either. You will see these a lot as well. Chew this, Coca-Cola gum, 1 cent. Nope. Never actually made by Coke. Always look for the Franklin mark. It has to be Franklin on the lid and on the jar to be legit. And the paper label, that's a tricky thing too, because someone could get one of these old jars and fake a paper label. So you got to be careful with that too. But even if you were to buy something that had a fake label, if it's a legit Franklin jar, it's still going to hold its value. So just be aware of those things. I wanted to show you, when you go on eBay, look at all of the Coca-Cola gum stuff that comes up for sale. There's quite a bit of it in all different styles. They've even got like a match holder that was never made by Coke. Just tons of reproduction stuff. This is something you see a lot. People take advertisements, like old images, and they put them into glass paperweights or change trays. Coke never did anything with the Pepsi gum on it. This $150 price tag is absolutely insane. That person clearly does not know that it is totally nothing that was ever made by Coke. The other thing is they never did something like, they had a box, a display box similar to this, but this is a reproduction, and I have no clue why they've got that at $425.
Wow.
I really think that's just absolutely bananas, you know. Also, they never made things like this. This was never a rare Coca-Cola thing. See, this is what I mean by rare. People list all this stuff as rare. Rare Dutch boy, metal framed reproductions, $175. I mean, that's bananas. Don't pay that price. The other thing is with the Dutch boys, they did make a Dutch boy store display. Here is him here. Now, they have him as a metal advertising sign. Coke never made him as a metal sign, guys. They only made him as a cardboard paper cutout. And if you find the cardboard cutout, he is worth good money. In fact, Alan Petretti has a very mint version in his collection. They never made it in metal, but this little Dutch boy is reproduced on gum stuff like you would not believe. So just be aware of the Coca-Cola gum stuff. And as a new collector, it's easy to get kind of duped by that. And I know that when I first started collecting and I was looking through the book, I was like, oh man, I would love to find gum stuff. And so it's easy to get kind of caught up by the novelty of it, but just make sure you do your due diligence and your homework. The other thing, going back to the Sprite boys, thermometers are reproduced a ton. There are a lot of fantasy thermometers. One of them is with the Sprite boy. You will never find that Coke did an original thermometer with the Sprite boy. They did a lot of thermometers, mainly elongated ones, but they never did one with the Sprite boy. So he is a fantasy item. The other thing is you'll find these like old looking cigarette boxes. Coke never did those. They did a series of, this one here is a match safe, I believe. It is not a legitimate piece of Coca-Cola collecting. This is something that you can buy right now on Amazon with the Sprite boy, and it's 5 cents again. You can just see how much people like to put that 5-cent thing on stuff. But this is something I don't know if it was actually licensed by Coke. I think it was, because it says visit the Coca-Cola store. But just know that the Sprite boy is on a lot of images, and they never made a Sprite boy thermometer that I know of. So there's the gum. Here's something that's also a fantasy. Again, back to these little paperweight things. This was taken off of an original advert, this image here, and then placed into a glass paperweight. And they've kind of antiqued the edges to make it look old. It's not. And I think I show that. These tabs got messed up somehow. But just know that came off of an original ad back when Coca-Cola gum was sold, but it's not a paperweight. They never did a paperweight. There it is. You can see here. That came from a magazine ad, 1906 to 1907. So, I mean, finding one of these gotta be pretty hard. So you're not going to find it in a paperweight. The other thing that I find a lot, and I do want to mention this is so important, is I see these everywhere. These little straw containers. Yeah, they're kind of neat. If you're doing a vintage soda fountain in your house, you want straws for milkshakes. I could see the use of one of these in the home and why people like them. I mean, they're kind of cutesy. That, I don't like that word, but decorating, cutesy, you know. But they're not made by Coke. I've seen people list these as old, as rare, as antique. I've even seen one listed from the soda fountains. They're not. They were not made by Coke. Coke also did some reproduction of these that you can buy currently on their website right now. They never made these. So just be aware, they're not old. They're not from the 1900s soda fountain. They just didn't exist. So that is something that you see a lot of. The other thing that I see quite a bit on eBay for some reason, I don't know why recently all of these have been popping up, but I saw this and I was like, this doesn't look right to me. And I guess as a collector, for as long as I've been looking at Coke stuff, I can just kind of tell when something looks off. And you'll get that feeling as you get more attuned to Coke and what they made and their things. But this is a porcelain sign. So this is an example of a sign that's actually porcelain. It has some good weight to it and probably fairly good quality. But Coke never did this. Now, this is modeled off of another Coke sign, but they never put one airport fountain. This is just something that Coke never did, and it was made without the permission of Coke. So just be aware when you see these airport fountain signs, they're not rare. The last one I saw on eBay was listed for $1,500. It did not sell. I think collectors were very skeptical, and probably people that have done their research knew that it wasn't real. But just know that those do exist. Another thing you'll see is cigar stuff, because Coca-Cola did, when they did the gum, they also did cigars for a short time. This is an image that was taken, and they've made it onto a label, and they've called it a cigar box label. They never made anything like this. So just know that no original actually does exist of this. Now, this is going back to the cash register and the milk glass tray. These are things that people actually try to pass off as old. And I see these in antique stores actually quite a bit. They are confusing to us resellers because, yes, I actually am holding, when I hold these, a piece of real old Bakelite. So these are Bakelite pieces. They've come in button hooks. They've come in knives. They come in forks. They have meat servers, carving knives. I mean, I've seen them in all kinds of things. And they are Bakelite, and they are real silverware. They are legit like Bakelite silverware, but they've decaled the Coca-Cola logo on it. Coke never did any such thing. They never made letter openers either with that logo and the Bakelite. Now, they did do letter openers, but they're metal, I believe. So just be aware, these kind of have no value in the realm of Coke. Do they have value because they are Bakelite silverware? That is debatable. But I kind of feel that they've ruined the Bakelite because they've slapped a modern kind of logo on it that never was made by Coke. So I don't know. That's up to you guys to decide on whether or not it has more value because it's Bakelite. But I kind of would say no, because it's not made by Coke. Also, something I didn't cover in this triptych, because again, just the sheer volume of stuff Coke made is unbelievable, but they made a ton of toys. And Coke is still reproducing the toy trucks. They're still reproducing a lot of that stuff, but you will find a box here of checkers. These are fantasy items. The box is, as Alan lists, is really poor quality. It's a stamp box. It was never made by Coke. So just be aware when you see this image on a box of checkers that Coke never made it. Now, did they make checkers? Yes, they certainly did. They made a whole collection of kids' toys and things. And that is a whole other triptych in an area that I particularly don't collect. I know very little about it. And that will be something for another day. But just be aware that that does exist and it is not real. The last couple of things I want to talk about is, again, the thermometers. You really got to be careful with these because they are still making them today. And this is a fantasy thermometer. So they've taken an image. Again, there's that 5-cent little logo here. And they've taken an image from one of the early 1900s trays and calendars, and they have put it onto a thermometer. And I find this hilarious because they have done a really bad marriage here. Any true Coca-Cola collector who knows their Coke slogans knows that Enjoy Coca-Cola with this little line did not come out until much later. So they've added this like Coca-Cola in 5-cent bottles, early little advertising slogan here with this older advertising slogan, and then tried to put a little bit of the decorations from the Mexican trays combined with like a 1900. It's just a really bad fantasy item, and it never existed. In my opinion, it's just weird. I'm not a big fan. I'm not shaming anyone that has one of these. My point here is not to shame, but it's just to educate and make you aware that these things are not old, they're not rare, and Coke never made them. So there is that. And there's a lot of reproductions of thermometers, so you really got to do your homework if you want a real legit old thermometer. The other thing that I see a ton of, I see these in antique stores all the time, is these Coca-Cola belt buckles. Coca-Cola never made these. So these are just out there by the thousands. You can just see, this is just a quick image search on eBay of belt buckles, and look at all of them. I mean, there's just tons of them. Coke never did these. They never did one with the naked lady. They never made them in these kind of antique brass shapes. This one is just really bizarre to me. Also, you got to be leery of these Coca-Cola fonts and scripts, because people will try to fake the old script and pass it off as old when it's not. So you really got to educate yourself on the slogans they used, when they used them, and the different versions of the little Coca-Cola C. There are some early bottles that have sort of this interesting shape to the C on them, but they didn't put them on belt buckles, certainly, because they never made them, and they never put that on anything else. So just do your research on that kind of thing. And that is where having that guidebook, I mean, I can't speak highly enough of it, because that is just like the end all be all of collecting. If you want to get into collecting, you got to have the TRUSTY's book. You got to study, talk to collectors, see stuff with your own eyes, go to antique stores, pick things up with your hands, and really study it. It's all about the details, knowing what Coke made and finding those details out, and really just seeking things out on your own, and saying to yourself that you're just going to assume everything is a fake or a reproduction until proven original. That is my motto. I always am leery until I can prove it. Now, this is one of the last things I want to talk about, is this Coca-Cola cigar band. These are actually faked a lot, because everyone wants a Coca-Cola cigar band, and I'm really lucky to have an original one. One of the ways you can tell an original from a faked piece or a fantasy item is Coca-Cola never did these cigar bands, the top one here. Now, the easiest way to tell them apart is notice that the Coke in the bottle doesn't go all the way up to the top. This bottom cigar band, the Coke goes all the way up to the top, and you can read the word Coca-Cola all the way across easily. This top one up here, the Coca part in Coca-Cola is cut off, and the Coke doesn't go all the way up to the top. It's also a different color. So this is kind of a lighter green. This is more of a forest green. So you can easily spot that when you're looking at cigar bands. So don't, as a new collector, get duped into buying a really expensive cigar band when it may be a fantasy item. So make sure you check that bottle. The other thing I want to mention here with the Coca-Cola cigar bands is there is a price guide floating around. It's Coca-Cola candy and cigars. They actually did make a price guide, a legitimate price guide for Coca-Cola candy and cigars. But in the 80s, there was a new one put out by a collector that reproduced this. So you could kind of call this a fantasy item, but I would say it's more of a reproduction. So they copied all of the images from the original catalog, and they put it into this booklet. Now, you can tell these right off the bat, because the originals do not have this. I don't even know what you would call it, but it's like it's shiny, and it's kind of cracked and mirrored and bubbly. Like whatever that texture is was not on the original cover. So when these are around quite a bit on eBay, and I see them selling for big bucks, people listing them as rare Coca-Cola catalog. They're not. They were made by the masses in the 80s, and they're great. I have one of these. I bought it for $10. They're great to see what Coca-Cola sold back in the day as far as cigars and candy, because it is a copy of the original one, but they're not worth tons of money. So don't, as a collector, get duped into buying one of these thinking it's an original from the 30s, and it's not. So just be aware those do exist. The last thing I want to bring up is this. Now, I don't know if this is actually sold by Coke or if these are fantasy items, but this goes along kind of with two categories. When we're talking about vintage, we talk a lot about jadeite and trying to decide whether or not it's real, because jadeite is reproduced like crazy and it's so popular nowadays. And I found these, and they're jadeite Coca-Cola malt cups. They also have made butter dishes, salt and pepper shakers. They've put the Coca-Cola logo on it. They are not old. They're not real jadeite. They're not the stuff that we're all looking for with Fire King on the bottom. But a lot of these little jadeite pieces, I just saw a picture too with it, are actually marked Coca-Cola. So this is something I'm not sure if it was produced by Coke in more of their modern section, because, you know, Coke is still making things. They're still making a lot of collector's items. And I don't know if this is something they made or if this was reproduced by this tablecraft company. I'm not 100% sure. But when you see these, just know they're not real jadeite. They're not the vintage jadeite, and they're probably not going to have much value because Coke didn't make them back in the day. They're not old things that collectors are seeking out. So I thought that was interesting to show. And these are available on Amazon right now. Now, the last thing here as we wrap up the triptych, and I know this was a long one, but I really felt that this topic needed the length that we provided today because, like I said, the history of Coca-Cola, the amount of things that Coca-Cola made is unbelievable, and we just barely scratched the surface. I didn't even get into the market for the Canadian market, the French market, the Mexican market, for all of the stuff they produced there. I didn't get into toys. I didn't really have time to cover signs either. It's just amazing what they made. So again, I cannot reiterate this enough. Guys, if you do not have Petretti's book, you have to get it. This, even as a reseller, is like an amazing tool. You can flip through this and figure out if something is real or repro in just a matter of seconds. It is fantastic. If I could carry this around in my pocket, I would. This book and the Fostoria book and Warman's Depression Guidebook are probably the three books, if I was stuck on an island and I could only have those three, would be my go-to books. So I can't recommend this enough. This is on Thrift Books. Again, I'm not sponsored by Alan Petretti at all. I never met the guy. I just love what he's done. I love all of the stuff he's done for the Coca-Cola collector community. I think he's extremely knowledgeable, and I love his book. Vinny and I both use this book a lot, and I really can't recommend it enough. This is on Thrift Books for $5.39. Now, this is the older guidebook. Vinny has the newer guidebook. This one, the newer guidebook, is in color. Parts of it, I believe, are in color. So the trays will be in color in this book. So I highly recommend getting the newer version of it. I have the older version, but it is a wonderful book regardless. And then the last resource guide is something that Vinny put out in 2017. And this is actually how I found the vintage community, is through this video right here. I was searching online when I first started collecting trays, and I thought, I wonder if anyone collects these, because at this point I didn't know there were collectors clubs. I was very new to the hobby. I had no clue if these collectors pieces even existed on video. So I thought, well, let me search Coca-Cola trays. And Vinny's video came up and I was hooked. And I subscribed to Vinny. I started watching him and many other people from the community I found through Vinny. So Vinny, I have to thank you for my love of Coca-Cola trays. And of course, this video that Vinny did on identifying authentic trays is fantastic because he shows things in this video side by side. He does a really great side-by-side comparison with great detail. So I highly recommend this video if you're getting into the trays. So Vinny, fantastic job. So guys, that is going to conclude the triptych for tonight. Now, of course, if you have any pieces that you have a question about, I know Vinny, I'm going to speak for you, Vinny. I know Vinny will be glad to answer them on Instagram, and I will always be available as well on Instagram. So if you want to send me a picture of anything that you find while you're out shopping or in your collection and you want me to identify it, I don't have all the answers. I don't claim to be the most knowledgeable person, but I certainly can help. And if there's something that you're curious about, I can always look it up in my book as well. So just know that I'm available on Instagram for anything Coca-Cola, and I know Vinny is as well. So Vinny, I'm speaking for you there. But this was a fantastic triptych. I hope it gave you a little insight into repros and fantasy items, and will help not only the collector, but the reseller alike. So Patrick and Nate, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This is fantastic. And I want you guys to tell a little bit about what's coming up next for you.
Thanks, Katie. That was really, really interesting. We've had great numbers all the way through. So it'll be my turn next week. And rather than speak about something specific, I will be taking everyone on a tour of the 2 online catalogs from my local auction house. One will be an estate and collectible catalog. The other will be a jewelry and fine art catalog. I'll be sending those links to Patrick and Katie and ask them to pick a few items out of that we can focus and look on. And anyone who is interested in having a look at those catalogs, I'll be more than happy to send the link through to them as well. And if they want to get back to me and say that I'd like to look at a certain lot or a certain couple of lots in more detail on the triptych, I'd be happy to do that. That's dependent on how many people are interested in doing that, obviously. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
Fantastic, Nate. And Nate and I have a special project coming up together on Wednesday. We are doing a cooking video together, and I had Nate on voice, and we cooked one of his signature dishes. So you want to come by on my channel for the premiere of that at 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. And Patrick, what's next for you?
What should be next for me is on Wednesday, I would be part of the duo dive with Katie. I am traveling yet again this week, and it's questionable. I may not be able to participate, but the duo dive will be on Katie's channel with Miss Pamela Blanchard, who is being part of the duo dive. So then Thursday, I will have my sale. That will be happening on the road. So I will be in an undisclosed location on Thursday night. And of course, participating in Nate's triptych on Sunday, which I'm really looking forward to because that is drifting into the area that I really hope the triptych would get into, is, just showing, yes, values, but getting away from we don't have to just look at eBay, what are auction houses doing? And, to a certain extent, how do they work and how do they work differently in New Zealand? And then next Monday, so not tomorrow, but the following, I will be on your channel, Katie. So are you ready to talk about what you're doing a week from tomorrow?
Yes, I am. I'm very excited about that. I have hit 2,000 subscribers, so thank you everyone that has helped me get there. And to celebrate, I am eating a nasty Jell-O mold. So you guys voted for the shrimp, and I am eating that shrimp and pea and egg. Which sounds putrid, so I'm getting ready to puke. But
and I will celebrate with Katie making my own gelatinous creation. I did not let you freaks vote on it because that's what you would make me eat. So I will just give the code word for what I will be dining on that evening will be SpaghettiOs.
So Patrick is a wonderful human, and we owe him a big round of applause for being willing to come on camera, because no one else has been willing. I put out the invitation, but no one has been willing to come on and eat Jell-O with me in celebration of my 2,000. So Patrick, you are awesome. I give you big props for that.
I may regret it later, but I'm more than happy. I'm very, very excited that you hit your 2,000 mark. You were working really hard. You put out some great content. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to celebrate with you and eat something gross.
Well, I couldn't have done it without you and Nate and everyone in the community. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you follow everyone in the triptych on Instagram and on YouTube. I've linked them down below. And folks, we'll see you for all these fun upcoming events this week. So make sure you hit that bell so you get notified when we all go live and do our fun content. And as always, I hope you guys will stay in, stay safe, and vent YouTube. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye,
Hey,
everyone.
everybody.